A few seconds here. Right. I hereby call to order the Roseville City Council meeting for Monday, June 3rd, 2024. Can everyone hear okay? All right. First, we'll start with the roll call. Mr. Treasurer, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Strawn.
Here.
Councilmember Etten.
Here.
Councilmember Schroeder.
Here.
Councilmember Groff.
Here.
Mayor Rowe.
Here. And with us at the dais, we have our City Attorney, Rachel Tierney, who's on my right at the end, and our City Manager, Pat Trudgeon, is on my left at the other end of the dais. We have a number of staff, department heads, and guests who will be appearing and participating in the meeting. I'll make introductions as those folks come forward. I would ask if you have a cell phone to be sure to silence it or otherwise assure that it doesn't disrupt the meeting this evening. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We do have extra copies of the meeting agenda on the back table underneath the clock by the back door if you need a copy of the agenda. We also do have one complete set of the meeting materials in a 3-ring binder that is to be shared by everyone but is available for the public's use as needed to refer to for the meeting this evening. Since we have a number of people here who may be here to testify, I think I'll go ahead and go through at the start of the meeting here some of the protocols for public comment, just to familiarize folks with that. We ask that folks keep their comments to about a 3-minute time limit, and I try to enforce that gently and generously if I can. But you can say a lot in 3 minutes for sure, so don't be too intimidated by that. When you come up to speak, we do have the 2 microphones at the front table. And that's where public comment is made, so you can have a seat at the table when it's time to do that. And we, of course, take turns if multiple people want to speak. But since we do have the 2 microphones, and if there are a lot of people that want to speak, we can have the next person who wants to speak have a seat at the unused microphone and be ready to go when the previous speaker is finished. And then if you have a name that we might not be able to accurately guess the spelling of for the official record of the hearing, we do have a clipboard off to the side on the table. And generally the way it works most efficiently is if you need to write your name down just so we have that spelling, you can finish your comments and then step off to the side to fill in your name, and then that'll allow the next person to go ahead and start speaking, and we can keep things moving hopefully fairly efficiently. And there'll be more that I'll go through at the start of the public hearing portion when we get to that, but I did want to at least cover that at the beginning so we have half a chance of getting it right when we get to that point, and mostly that's on me. With that, I think the only other piece of housekeeping was just to note that there was to be a hearing of an appeal of a staff decision on a fence on South McCarran's Boulevard this evening, and that appeal has been postponed. The parties involved had got new legal representation, and their particular lawyer, that new lawyer, was not up to speed by this evening, and so they asked for that item to be postponed. That item will be heard on June 17th, which is our next council meeting, just to make folks aware of that. And we'll try to mention that one more time, just in case folks come in late and we're looking for that item. And we did not put it on the official agenda that's been published, but I know people were kind of expecting that, so we'll make sure and make folks aware of that. With that, we'd ask folks to stand, if you're able, for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next on tonight's agenda is approval of the agenda this evening. And as always, we'll check with staff first to see if there are any changes or corrections to the agenda from a staff perspective.
Mr. Mayor, there's no changes, staff.
All right. Second, we'll check with council members. Are there any changes that council members would like to make to the agenda this evening, or any items on the consent agenda that council members would like removed for separate consideration this evening? All right. And then one final check as it relates to the agenda this evening. As I mentioned, we have what we call our consent agenda items, which begin on the bottom of page 2 and carry on to on the bottom of page 1 and carry on to page 2 in section 10 of tonight's agenda, items A through F. These are normally taken up as a single motion, and it's at the end of the meeting, and there's not much of a chance for input. But if you happen to be here for one of those items in section 10, items A through F, this would be the time to let us know. And just so you know, it's not related to the vacation of the right-of-way or the item related to the subdivision variance. If those two items are things you're here for, we will definitely take those up earlier in the meeting and definitely will have the opportunity for public comment. But if anyone is here for an item in section 10 of tonight's agenda, this would be the chance to let us know, and we can take up that item earlier in the meeting so you have a chance to speak earlier and not have to wait to the end. Is there anyone here for an item in section 10 of tonight's agenda? All right, does not appear to be the case. That being said, then, we have our agenda as presented. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Schroeder, to approve tonight's agenda as presented. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. We have our agenda for tonight. Next on our agenda is our first opportunity in the meeting for public comment. As we kind of alluded to, there will be public hearings this evening on some vacation easements and some other matters, and there will be public comment for those specific items as those items come up. But at the start of each council meeting, we do provide an opportunity for general public comment. This is usually to be related to items that might either be of interest to people in the community, such as some sort of event announcement, or items related to city business that we're not taking up this evening. So if anyone is here to speak about an item not on tonight's agenda under general public comment, this would be the time to let us know, and we can bring you up for those comments. Is there anyone here tonight to speak to an item that's not on tonight's agenda? All right, doesn't appear to be the case. Then we'll move from general public comment right into the rest of our agenda. The first item under recognitions and donations is a proclamation related to Juneteenth in Roseville. And I will, are we going to read the proclamation first, or are you just preparing for?
I was going to do just a quick background and then request council to issue the proclamation.
Perfect, and hopefully that'll include information on when and where and all that stuff too. All right, Ms. Olson, our Assistant City Manager, with a little bit of information on Juneteenth and then the proclamation.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Tonight, staff is bringing forward a proclamation to recognize Juneteenth and to request that council consider issuing this proclamation and adding it to the list of annual proclamations. A little bit of background. So Juneteenth is short for June 19th, and it marks the day when federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, in 1865 to take control of the state and ensure that all enslaved people would be freed. The troops' arrival came 2.5 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, and Juneteenth honors the end to slavery in the United States. It is also considered the longest-running African-American holiday. On June 17, 2021, it officially became a federal holiday. Back in 2017, however, a group of Roseville residents did gather here at one of our parks and started the tradition of meeting and celebrating for this. That tradition has grown, and in addition to it growing, there is a celebration that the city is helping to sponsor again this year. That will take place on June 15th at Roseville Central Park from 11 to 2. And a couple of the other things that are also included in the proclamation is a little bit of the history on the official designation as a holiday. So as I mentioned, the federal government declared it a holiday in 2021. And then the city council declared it a holiday in 2022. And then the state declared it an official state holiday in 2023. So with that, staff believes it meets the requirements of the proclamation policy that council has adopted, which is also included in your packet. We are requesting you to consider it if there's any changes you'd like to see in the proclamation. Staff did reach out to a group of residents that are on the Juneteenth Planning Commission to get their input on it. They have weighed in on it, and this language does reflect some of their input as well. So with that, I will stand for any questions, but the official request of council is to issue the proclamation and add it to the list of annual proclamations.
All right, thank you, Ms. Olson. I kind of jumped the gun a little bit. I was ready to go ahead and get the proclamation read and adopted. I appreciate that additional insight, though. Are there questions from the council? Councilman Bratton.
I'm curious if you can clarify the timing for this. The resolution says 11 to, or the proclamation says 11 to 3, and you just said 11 to 2. I'm looking on our website as fast as I can, but it's actually not under the city meetings.
I do believe it is 11 to 2. I'm looking at some. Do you have it handy?
I do.
Says
It's 11 to
11 to
3 on the
11 to
postcard
3.
that
My
invited
apologies.
us.
I misspoke.
Okay, all right, very good. Yep,
All right.
thanks.
Thanks for the clarification. Other questions for staff? Since this is a bit of a decision item for the council, we'll double check, is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak as to whether to add this proclamation to the annual proclamations that the city makes? Does anyone wish to speak to this item this evening? All right, seeing no one, we'll move to council consideration. Is there any objection to reading the proclamation and having a motion on the proclamation?
Motion
And
to
then making
approve?
it a motion to approve it being added to the list of annual proclamations?
Yes, please.
Fair enough?
Second.
All right, that's been moved by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by Councilmember Etten, to add it to the list of official proclamations for the city. Discussion on the motion as the maker, Councilmember Strawn.
I think it's important. We've been supporting this financially and with volunteers and people hours for several years, and so I think it's really good. And knowing that it will be there moving forward in years to come, hopefully before the start of June.
All right, as the seconder, any additional
Nothing
discussion?
further, thanks.
All right, other council discussion, Councilmember Grau.
I just want to say I think it's important because we want to be an inclusive and welcoming city, and this is part of that step.
All right, other discussion on that motion? And this is the motion to make it this proclamation part of the official annual list of city proclamations. Hearing no other discussion on the motion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? That passes unanimously. And now, I'll read the proclamation. And the proclamation reads as follows. Whereas on January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which established that all enslaved people in the Confederate States were set free, and whereas many slave owners in the state of Texas did not release their slaves, and on June 19th, 1865, General Gordon Granger and his troops entered Galveston, Texas, after the surrender of Robert E. Lee at Appomattox in Virginia. And upon General Granger's arrival in Texas soil, he issued General's Order Number 3. And whereas this order officially declared the immediate release and freedom of the remainder of slaves located in Texas, and the slaves that were forcibly held captive for almost 3 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was issued were finally pronounced free men and women. And whereas in 1866, black freedmen organized the first celebration of Jubilee Day on June 19th, 1866, featuring music, ethnic cuisines, prayer services, and other activities, and June 19th is now recognized as a ceremonial holiday in 47 states, with Texas being the first to declare Juneteenth a state holiday in 1980. And whereas Juneteenth is a day of committed reflection and recognizes that across people and nations, historic, ongoing, structurally embedded, and government-sanctioned racial discrimination has perpetuated its impacts upon all of our generations, including to this very day. And whereas in June of 2017, 12 Roseville residents gathered at a Roseville park in recognition of Juneteenth to be in community with each other and to honor and celebrate Black culture, beginning a new Juneteenth tradition in Roseville. And whereas the City of Roseville and its leadership strive to be intentional and accountable to identify solutions to undo the harm of the legacy of racial discrimination and slavery, and whereas on November 7th, 2022, the City of Roseville declared June 19th an official city-recognized holiday, and on February 23rd, 2023, Juneteenth officially became a state holiday in the state of Minnesota. And whereas the 2024 Juneteenth Event Committee consists of a dozen volunteers committed to providing a great experience in the City of Roseville, and whereas June 15th, 2024, on Saturday, June 15th, 2024, the community will gather again for the annual celebration of Juneteenth in Roseville Central Park from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Now, therefore, be resolved, the City of Roseville hereby declare June 19th, 2024 to be Juneteenth in the City of Roseville.
So,
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Etten. Discussion on that motion.
No, thanks.
Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the proclamation of Juneteenth in Roseville signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and that proclamation is approved. Thank you again, Ms. Olson. Thank you to the Planning Committee. We're looking forward to that event once again on Saturday, the 15th, from 11 to 3 in Central Park. That brings us then to business items this evening. Our first business item is to hold a public hearing and consider a request to approve a plat and a subdivision variance related to that plat. And we have our senior planner, Brian Lloyd, with us this evening to introduce this item. Mr. Lloyd, welcome.
Thank you. As you mentioned, this is a subdivision application at 210 County Road B2, sort of outlined in what is red on my page, but less red on the screen there. and it spans the stretch between County Road B2 and Grandview Avenue there. The property itself is composed of 7 platted lots that kind of run through from north to south, as well as recently vacated half of the former Ida Avenue right-of-way, and what had been an alley, kind of a T-shaped alley behind all of these lots. So it's half of an alley on this side and half of a street on this side, making up just about 1 acre of land there. And the proposal is to subdivide into 3, arranged like this, with the existing house at 210 County Road B2 remaining in place and being on its own sort of large, roughly half of the existing parcel. That'd be lot 3 in the plat. And lots 1 and 2 are on the south side, fronting along Grandview Avenue. The lots themselves all conform to the minimum area requirements that are established in the zoning code. Clearly, this lot 3 on the north side meets the minimum width requirement, but the reason that this proposal includes a subdivision variance component is these 2 lots along Grandview Avenue are about 80 feet wide, whereas the minimum required width for lots for single-family development like this would be 85 feet. The tree preservation plan, which was included in the packet, but it is maybe too small of details to bother showing on the screen here, indicates that there are several mature trees on the site. Many of them would be removed not only for the new homes, but for the stormwater management infiltration area there, as well as kind of grading around it. I mentioned that because the applicant's figure in the calculation for how many replacement trees these removals would generate differs quite a bit from what staff has calculated. Presumably, it seems because a lot of the trees were not categorized correctly as being exempt for being in these stormwater management areas. But this is something we're continuing to sort of validate, and we'll have, a correct calculation certainly before any permits are issued for site work and that sort of thing, as would be typical for plat applications. The tree preservation plans that are submitted with an application, much like the stormwater management plans that are submitted, are considered preliminary, just sort of demonstrating, an awareness of the issues and, a start toward the sort of full analysis and full kind of preparation for it. And then those plans, both grading and drainage and stormwater management, as well as tree preservation, have to be finalized before permits are issued for that sort of thing. This, as a subdivision, does activate the requirement for park dedication. To that end, the Parks and Recreation Commission reviewed the proposal at their meeting about a month ago, and they recommended a dedication of cash in lieu of land. So since this is a 3-lot subdivision out of a single parcel, there's a sort of 2 increment fee that would be associated with that. And if I can look quickly enough, that would be $8,500 would be due as a park dedication fee, which would be collected prior to the city releasing the signed plat materials to be recorded at Ramsey County. And that brings me to the subdivision variance component. The city council can consider approving subdivisions that have some nonconformities with respect to standard subdivision requirements or standing zoning requirements through this subdivision variance consideration. And the subdivision code specifies a series of 4 findings that are required to be evaluated and made prior to approving a subdivision variance request. And I'll just run through those quickly and provide our sort of staff suggestion as reasonable findings related to them. One of the considerations is whether the proposal is consistent with the comprehensive plan. These 2 lots themselves are the ones that are sort of affected by the subdivision variance request. And, given their size, even at the substandard width, they do get to about the middle of the range that is promoted by, encouraged by the comprehensive plan for low-density development like this. The comprehensive plan says that these low-density areas are to be between 1.5 and 8 units per acre in density, and 2 units on about half an acre of land is right about 4 units per acre. Again, in the middle of that range. One of the considerations is whether the proposal is in harmony with the purposes and intent of the zoning and subdivision codes. It's certainly consistent with all of the pertaining subdivision requirements. And with respect to the zoning code, it only fails to conform to this minimum width requirement. And as we evaluate, what is the purpose of the width requirement, it's generally to ensure that there's adequate space around each home for typical residential use, being able to pass from front yard to backyard, to move things around the side if need be, as well as to create a sort of uniformity in the distribution of homes along streets and blocks. The site plan here shows a generalized footprint for a new home improvement on both of those lots. And clearly there's enough room there not only to meet the minimum setbacks, but to have some kind of wider spaces along both sides as well. And incidentally, this, it's not a detail that is clear exactly in this scale of a map, but the 80-foot lots that are proposed here on the subject property are basically the same as the 80-foot lot widths of the rest of the homes going west there until we get to the curve. So it certainly fits into the context in that way. And it's, if one of the purposes of the zoning code is to create some uniformity along the street, these, fit with that intent. One of the considerations for subdivision variances is whether there's an unusual hardship on the land that sort of justifies the approval of a variance. There isn't a specific definition of unusual hardship in the subdivision code, but staff believes that the sort of tension between the density range that is promoted by the comprehensive plan and the minimum lot width on a site like this, where there is certainly plenty of area, is an unusual hardship that can justify the approval of the variance request if the city council deems it appropriate. And the final of these considerations is whether, if granting the variance for these substandard lots in this case, would change the character of this neighborhood. And as I pointed out earlier, many of the lots here adjacent to it to the west are this same 80-foot width, and so it would not change the character of that neighborhood by our assessment. With that presentation, I would indicate that staff does recommend approval of the proposed subdivision as well as the subdivision variance. There are a couple of conditions related to ensuring that the stormwater management and other sort of public works items that are mentioned in the staff report are attended to, as well as collecting the recommended park dedication fee. And if there are further questions about the proposal or our analysis of it, I can take those now.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lloyd. And just to clarify once again, the variance requested to the subdivision code is essentially a 5-foot width variance to the 85-foot requirement.
That's correct.
So that they would be 80-foot lots. All right. Are there questions from the council? Councilmember Strong.
Thank you. I was wondering, in attachment 3, page 18 of our packet, there is the tree preservation and removal plan. Is that consistent? You indicated there was some inconsistency. Is this the model that you would follow, or you would expect them to follow?
Yes. This is, not exactly what you asked, but this form of spreadsheet and sort of built-in calculator is certainly one that I'm familiar with seeing. So it's consistent in that way. And the only thing that that I was trying to address is there are many trees that are proposed to be removed in these kind of heavily graded areas that the kind of instructions, if you like, for tree preservation plans would say should be categorized as exempt from the replacement calculation. And this inventory doesn't exempt them. So it's a step that is missed, but it is not indicative of some inconsistency with meeting the requirements or something like that.
Okay, yeah, in looking on attachment 2, it doesn't look like it's a heavily forested area. So in reading attachment 3, it seems like there's a lot of trees being lost, but maybe they're of smaller size or not as much cover as they might indicate from the sheer number of them on attachment 3.
That's right. There's quite a few of the trees are smaller, and I don't know exactly what sort of portion of the sort of apparent tree cover on the aerial photo is, but it's entirely likely that much of it is below the sort of diameter of trunk that are classified as trees in our tree preservation. So brush and other smaller trees that wouldn't be accommodated in this process.
Okay. My other question is, on the original property that fronts B2, it looks like they have a pretty substantial driveway, but at present, it appears it may be a dirt structure. Is that correct?
I have not looked at that detail. It's the area of the improvements here are 30% or less of the parcel area,
Okay.
roughly speaking. I didn't pay attention to the nature of that surface. If it is a gravel surface or something like that, that's not something that the zoning code would allow. But as a pre-existing improvement, the colloquial term is grandfathered. It's a legal nonconformity, and the city likely can't require that it be paved as a result of this process.
Okay. I guess I was just curious, given that right now, the percentage of permeable surface is much lower because it's a much larger lot.
Sure.
But if we subdivide that into 3 parcels, then suddenly that is a much greater percentage of the remaining lot. And wondering if that is paved surface, if that would exceed by, as a reason for or against approving the plat, if that were to put it into, obviously, we wouldn't have to grandfather it if it was in that position. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I actually didn't even pay attention to what the material of that driveway surface was as I was looking at the extent of the improvements in the property. I was assuming that it was pavement of some sort, and measured it as such. So even if it's an entirely paved driveway and sort of parking area there, with the other improvements, does remain. I think it was close to 30%, but not in excess of 30%.
Okay, thank you.
And just to clarify a couple points on the tree preservation part of it, so the information that's in attachment 3 is actually shows what we'd say probably is too much replacement requirement
Yes.
per our standards. In other words, a lot of what was shown as needing to be replaced in that document is exempt from replacement in our code. So just to clarify that point. And then I note that the aerial photo is in the time when the trees don't have leaves on them, so it's very difficult to see for sure what the actual tree population in that area looks like from that photo. So it's a little hard to tell for sure. So appreciate the additional information. Are there other questions from council members? Councilmember Etten.
We're going to be talking about vacations in a little bit, but there's a road vacation for proposed Ida Avenue on the east side of this property. Where does that property go? Often they're split in half. This one is not. So is that all going
No,
to the
it
property
is.
to the east?
It
was
is.
already vacated.
Yep.
And the west half, so this dotted line here, I don't know if it's showing up, there's a dotted line.
Oh, I see. It's
here.
just twice the size of the vacation of the alley on the other side.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I understand.
And so the other side, the eastern edge of the Ida Avenue right-of-way was there. And so this eastern half of it was kind of vacated to the owners on this side.
Got it.
And the western half was vacated back there. And right, the alley is about half as wide, and kind of goes up and down there.
And the alley that was vacated has been added to the west side of this property as well.
Yes, the plat
Which there is a
proposal
line there, I think.
reflects
Yeah.
the vacation
I would
of
have
the street
looked at
right-of-way
it.
as well as the alley.
Follow.
Just to be complete, the alley went to about here.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for that. Sorry, I missed that. The other question I have is about the retaining wall that's shown in the southeast corner of this property. Is that a proposed retaining wall or something that's existing? I haven't driven by this one.
I believe that's a proposed retaining wall. It wasn't something that I typically would review with the plat proposal, so again, I'm not entirely sure. But this has been essentially a vacant southern back half of a piece of property, and that specific location being in an unbuilt right-of-way. So I presume that it's not there and, would be a proposed improvement.
Thank you.
Right, other questions from the council? Right, if not, this is a public hearing as it relates to this subdivision proposal as well as the variance request to the width requirement on the southern two property proposed lots. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this item this evening? If so, we can go through the parameters. Once again, the 3-minute time limit per speaker. We ask that you introduce yourself by name and street or address to help identify for the record, and then address comments or questions to the council. If there are more if there's more than one speaker and several comments or questions, several questions that require answering, we'll kind of wait to the end of all the comments and then answer questions at that point. Is there anyone here to speak to this proposed subdivision and variance request this evening? All right, does not appear to be the case. Have a seat, yep.
Hi, Carrie Gelly from Lovell Avenue in Roseville. I'm pretty familiar with this property just by living in Roseville and traveling back and forth on either the Grandview side or the B2 side. So I don't necessarily have comments, but I just have questions, and I don't know if someone is here that can answer it. 2 questions. One, I'm a little foggy about the tree preservation, et cetera, as it was described. So if anyone could speak to, like, is there a general idea of the number of mature trees that would be lost due to this? And then if they would be replaced with young trees or seedlings or saplings or whatever, even like a ballpark range? That's the first question. And then the second question is it known what the price of the homes will be, or price range for the homes that will be built on those 2 new lots? Those are my questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone else from the public that wishes to speak to this item? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing then, and we'll go to, first of all, responding to the questions. And maybe first we'll check, is there a representative of the applicant here this evening who might be able to speak to the potential price range for the homes? If you have any idea, if you don't, you can just say you don't. Feel free to come on up if you wish to. Yeah. And just once again, introduce yourself. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. My name is Carla Blomberg. My husband and I own these lots, and I don't know what the price range would be. I can tell you that the home right directly to the west, which is probably a typical 2-story that most likely would be similar, sold this winter for $400,000. And I would expect that the next price range is going to be in excess of that. But I can't tell you what that number actually would be. And also on the trees, we love trees ourselves. We would never have somebody come down and just knock everything down. Much of it is dependent on what's required by the city. So of course, those have to come down on whatever the requirements are. And there's not any reason for us not to comply with whatever the city advises, but it's a lot of scrub trees that you're seeing, so those numbers are really inaccurate. If you walk back there, I mean, it's shrubs and wild mess, not necessarily nice trees when you've got a landscaped yard with grass and beautiful trees. So we don't know what that number is going to be, but whatever it is, we will certainly be in compliance, and there's absolutely no intention to take away any trees that don't need to be taken away. So again, sorry, but it's an unknown.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that information. While you're sitting there, are there any questions, follow-up questions from the council? Great. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. And then maybe from a staff perspective on the tree preservation calculations, if I remember right, and I don't have the spreadsheet off the top of my head memorized, but it talks about sort of the what they call caliper inches of trees that are going to be lost, not necessarily a count of the number of trees, although I think that is sort of part of it as well. And so then what has to be replaced is comparable, and I'll maybe let somebody who knows more about it speak more to it than that. Mr. Lloyd.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that it's not necessarily a count of how many trees are there and being removed and what does that mean for replacement, but it's a calculation based on the diameter of the trunks of the trees that are going to be removed. And, there's a certain amount that is kind of allowed under the zoning code. And it's, I suppose, at the end of the day, an evaluation of how much more tree material is being proposed to be removed beyond what is allowed. And then that feeds into a calculation of replacement trees, and we have minimum standards for those replacement trees. They will be small, especially compared to mature trees, but they have a minimum diameter for their own trunks being planted of 3 inches per tree. So, our calculation results in a number of caliper inches as a replacement obligation. We divide that number by 3 for 3-inch replacement trees, and that's the count of replacement trees then that sort of fit into that obligation.
Right, and certainly the type of tree is taken into account in those calculations as well. So if we have categories like a heritage tree, which is fairly significant, or significant trees, and then sort of down from there, and the penalty for replacement is greater for the more significant type of tree category than for the less significant category. So that all enters into the equation as well. That doesn't necessarily mean that the heritage tree with the 18 inch diameter trunk or whatever is going to be replaced with the same thing, but that just it requires a larger amount of caliper inches to replace if it is removed. All right. If there aren't other questions from the council, once again, we've got the request before us, and we do have a draft resolution in the packet as well, which is attachment 5. That outlines the staff's suggested findings as it relates to the variance requirements and the action that is suggested by the application that the council take with respect to this preliminary plat request. Also, this is a preliminary plat, I believe, so would we see a final plat come back to the council? Or is this because it's small enough that it's only 3 lots, it would just go right through the process?
That's right. It is presented as a preliminary plat, but if the city council approves the preliminary plat with or without some changes, those changes are simply made and then reviewed by staff, and it wouldn't come back to the city council after that.
Got it. It's only larger numbers of lots and larger properties that would come back for that second round. So that would be handled administratively by staff. All right. Council, is there a motion or suggested action discussion? Councilman Bratton?
I move approval of the lot division.
All right. Are you moving the resolution?
That's what I mean, yep.
All right. Just to be sure, because you said the lot division, but that didn't mention the variance part of it.
Yep.
And it was seconded by Councilmember Schroeder to adopt that resolution. Discussion on the motion. Maker of the motion, Councilman Bratton.
Yeah, I appreciate this came to us to consider, but there are 2 reasons that I'm not concerned about this. One is there are 13 other properties on the same little block there that meet the same width, and then it is actually over our total surface area requirements for the total lot. So I feel comfortable with how this will work out in the neighborhood as well as the coverage of the lot.
Right. As the seconder, Councilmember Schroeder.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It fits in with the neighborhood, and it makes sense, so.
All right. Other discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none, we have the motion before us to adopt the resolution attachment 5, which approves the plat as well as the subdivision variance as requested. If there's no further discussion on the motion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and that plat and variance are approved. Thank you, Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you.
All right, that then brings us to what may be the main event this evening. And that is a public hearing and consider resolutions considering the approval of vacation of multiple street easements and rights of way We've got a couple of different areas involved. One has been before the council before, and then one is new to our discussion this evening. We have our Public Works Director, Jesse Freihammer, with us this evening to introduce this item and the information for the public hearing. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Freihammer at this time.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As you kind of indicated, we've brought a couple of these vacation processes to you guys in the past. So this started in April of 2022. We have brought 2 other previous phases, so this is phase 3. There are 2 vacations tonight. One is Vacation D, which was brought to you guys about a year ago, and we tabled that because due to some public comment. And then Vacation O is a new one tonight. So just real quickly, Vacation D, which is resolution number 1 in the packet, is portion of Millwood Avenue west of Chatsworth. This next graphic is a little bit updated, but we more or less just updated the description and eliminated a little bit of the vacation just west of Chatsworth, and that was to make sure we maintain access into the park, as residents had requested at the previous meeting. So this updated description and resolution reflects that. Vacation Area O is over a very large area. It's basically all the alleys and walks east of Victoria, west of Grotto, and then south of County Road B2 and north of Cope Avenue. The proposed vacation would eliminate vehicular access. Access right now is technically not allowed because it's unimproved surface, it's not an improved alley. It would retain utility easement. So this would be needed for utilities. There are power poles back there, so it's needed for all the things like Excel, Comcast, anyone who's on those. We do also have, the city also has some utilities in the back as well, just a few storm sewer lines, but very random. But we do want to retain that, so all these would still be encumbered. Encroachments into the easements would typically not be allowed because, like I said, Excel needs to get back there with their trucks and potentially with us for our storm sewer. So if residents wanted to petition or request something, we could look into different options, but those have to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis, and we'd have to do encroachment agreements if we allowed that. So tonight, we do have to hold the public hearing for this. I think the mayor has kind of already described the comment period, but that's listed there as well. Otherwise, the recommended council action would be to open a public hearing and then consider approval of resolution for vacation of a portion of Millwood Avenue lying west within the plat of St. Paul Park, and that'd be resolution 1. And then the second one, requested action would be consider resolution approving right-of-way vacation of certain alleys and walks that are dedicated in the Sheeta plat and Chas A.B. Wide's Midway Edition plat. And then since this is a staff-initiated resolution, we would require a 4/5 vote. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. I can certainly answer any questions that the council may have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Freihammer. And I think what we'll try to do in terms of just the process here is we'll do the hearing for each vacation separately as well, so we can kind of keep everything straight, so we're not sort of bouncing back and forth, if that's all right. But for the questions from the council, we can bounce back and forth all we want. So with that, are there questions from the council on either of these items? Right, and just to clarify, maybe on this particular D, can you go back to the sort of the depiction? So as you described that eastern portion of it that was an extension of Millwood, is that the portion that was retained and not part of the vacation, as I understood your description of it?
Yeah, it's not shown up, but yeah, correct. Basically, the area between where the shaded area is and then Chatsworth, we pulled that off.
Okay.
That's what was previously included, so we're not giving that up, so there's full access into the park. The entire dedication, or the entire vacation area is actually over Ramsey County, a Ramsey County parcel.
Okay. And the what we're retaining at that point is an access easement essentially for the pathway access to the park
Correct.
property? Okay, great. Other questions from the council on either of these? Right, and then on O, I did have a question as it relates to, you just mentioned the encroachments aren't allowed into the utility easements. So if somebody wanted to put a fence up to the edge of their portion of that vacated property, that is an encroachment, would you say?
Correct. So the alleys are 20-foot alleys. The walks are only 12-foot. But since we do know they are used for Excel and other utilities to get back there, we'd have to look at them on a case-by-case basis, because if you put it down the center, it makes access very, very difficult. But potentially, depending if two neighbors work together, there might be something where you could support a gate, but we'd have to really look at those individually. But in general, we would not allow any encroachments at face value.
Right, and right now, just looking at aerial photography of that area, it appears where people do have fences, the fences do only go up to the alley and not into that area at this time, that as far as I could tell. So nothing would change from that perspective unless somebody was able to get work through an encroachment agreement with the city in terms of trying to move fences. Currently, as it stands right now, with these being alleys and walkways, are the property owners responsible for the maintenance, the mowing and things like that as it stands today?
Correct. So the city does not do any current maintenance on the alley of any sort,
Okay,
because it's unimproved.
all right, all right. So nothing would change in that regard necessarily either?
Correct.
Okay. So what would be changing for property owners is that essentially half of the alley would go to the north property owner, half would go to the south property owner, half of the walkway would go to the east, half would go to the west, roughly speaking, as allocated by the county, and that would become part of those parcels and property owned by those individuals, subject to the easement for utility access.
Correct. The big thing it's really clarifying is who can utilize the alley. We've had a lot of questions asked, can I drive back there? The problem is it's unimproved, so if you go drive and you rut up behind your neighbors, who's responsible for fixing it? Obviously, if the utility company's doing it, we can address that through permits or work it through with the utility company, but the general public, since they're unimproved, it makes it very difficult to regulate. Since it's really unimproved, they shouldn't really be used for access.
And as is usually the case in these vacations of rights-of-way or easements, the reason the city is proposing to vacate it is because the city has no intention to use the property for an alley. The city is not going to be putting in an alley at any time and has no plans to do that. Is that correct?
Correct. We do not currently maintain any alleys. This was platted before, I believe, before the city even was established, kind of with more of a traditional St. Paul standard, but we don't have any. We've never had a request to build it, so hence why, yeah, we'd like to vacate it if possible.
All right. And then I think my final question, and this may be more for the attorney than you, Mr. Freihammer, but I seem to recall as we talked about these the last couple times around, if the city has no intention to use the property for a city purpose, the obligation is really for the city to return the property to essentially rightful property owners. Am I correct in that sort of generalized interpretation?
The generalized interpretation is accurate.
All right, thank you. In other words, public entities should not maintain control over property if it's not going to be used by the public entity for the purpose for which that control was granted to the entity, essentially.
Mayor Rowe, I think that's accurate. The qualification that I would make is that there are certain public uses that this will continue to
Correct.
be used for, so this isn't completely black and white. So in general, you're accurate, subject to that clarification.
Right, so what we're doing is essentially, I believe these are rights of way. We're exchanging rights of way, which is essentially ownership, for an easement, which is access capability, right? Which is different than ownership. Great, thank you for that. Thank you for those clarifications. Councilman Bratton,
Just
question for
want to ask
staff?
one more clarification. I'm pretty sure I understand this correctly, but if this vacation moves forward, people still can't put their favorite tree in the middle of that or extend their fence 10 feet, because we're going to need access, or Excel's going to need access to that same former alley.
Correct.
Okay.
Probably the final question, Councilmember Strawn.
I would assume that'd be similar to what we would expect in the front yard, that you,
The
You can't-
15-foot from the street?
yeah, you can't put that the city has rights to the first.
Correct, yeah, we wouldn't allow a fence to be constructed in the front yard. Trees planted in the boulevard, you would need a city permit to do that, or really for anything else typically in the front yard. But a tree would be, the city owns and maintains trees in the boulevard, so if you wanted to plant one, you'd have to get a permit from the city to do that in the front yard.
Gotcha. I have a question about the north-south access. So these are kind of long blocks, so looking from B2 all the way to Cope, it would appear that maybe there's an unimproved path along there. Is that correct, or is there any use of that at this time?
We have some storm sewer in some of those, but there's no pathway of any sort currently in those corridors that I'm aware of.
Okay.
No official pathway, maybe is the way to say.
Correct, and I believe there's already, there might even be encroachments already over these, so.
And then anticipating a possible question from the public, the city doesn't receive a financial benefit from putting these portions of properties on the tax roll in the form of additional taxes collected, because what happens in the mechanism of taxes is that the city determines a gross amount of tax that has to be collected to pay the city budget, and then we send that to the county, and the county distributes it amongst all the taxpayers. And so we're not adding to the amount we collect, we're just changing how it's going to be distributed amongst the property owners. Just to clarify that too, this isn't some kind of cash grab that we're doing. So I wanted to clarify that point. Are there any other questions from the council? All right. Thank you, Mr. Fryhammer. We'll go through really quickly the parameters for public hearings. Again, just to be clear, we do have that 3-minute time limit per speaker. Once again, you can say a lot in 3 minutes, and so usually it's not an issue, but I will begin to enforce it if it looks like it's being abused. The other piece of it is, once again, just introduce yourself by your name and your street or your address as at the beginning of your comments. And if you have questions, we'll make a note of them and then return to those at the end of everybody's comments or questions. Provide answers. If it's a technical question, it's easier for us or our staff to answer. If it's a philosophical question about why you're doing this or why should you do this, that may be answered through a council discussion about the action. And then finally, Mr. Trudgeon, I believe you have some information to provide as to the notice that's been provided for this hearing.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Published and legal mail notices have been provided for this public hearing. Legal notices appeared in the city's legal newspaper, the Pioneer Press, on May 17th and 24th of 2024. Mail notices were sent on May 23rd, 2024. Affidavits of publishing and mailing are available in the office of the city engineer. But also note today we received 2 resident emails, both in relation to Vacation Area O. Michelle Harris emailed the city council to let you know that they are disapproving the vacation of the proposed property. And then Pauline Gray also about area O is opposed to the vacation resolution for area O. So 2 today, and you have them at your dais here.
And we'll make sure those are part of the official record as well. All right, with that, and one final reminder that we do have the 2 microphones, and so if there's a lot of people that want to speak, if one person is speaking, don't be shy about coming up and having a seat at the other microphone to be ready to go when the first person is finished, and we'll just kind of cycle through that way.
Starting with D. Starting with D.
Oh, and that's a very good point. Just to be clear, because I had said that at the beginning, we'll start the public hearing with vacation request D, which is the one west of Millwood Avenue. So we'll begin with that one. Sorry, I should have, thank you for reminding me of that, Councilmember Strawn. Since I said that's how we're going to do it, we'll make sure that's actually how we do it. So is there anyone here this evening who wishes to speak to the vacation of the right-of-way on what's called D, which is the Millwood Avenue and the access to the county open space? Anyone here for that item this evening? Does not appear to be the case. All right, ma'am, can you come back up to the table? You got a few extra steps in tonight. Thank you for your patience with that, and we'll move to a hearing in relation to the various vacations categorized under O. Welcome, and once again, if you could introduce yourself to begin your comments.
My name is Linda Brown. I live on Lovell. And Mr. Mayor, welcome, everybody. I am here because I support the easement. No paving, I like the grass, I like seeing, although it's not my property, it actually helps to see, there's nothing on it. But I have to mention that my property with the walker-bys are ruined. One apple tree completely destroyed, someone pulled it out of the ground. I've had a lot of plants stolen because of the access. But I figure if they want the plant more than whatever, I can plant another. It's really important to me about safety, however, and I've talked to City Hall about this to understand the letter. There is a culvert and underneath these easements, and particularly by the drainage. Now, I'm supposed to have a drain at the end of the level property, and they didn't do that. They were supposed to put a drain in when they put in the sidewalk. They didn't do that. So what happens is the water comes off the street, which they've tried to repair. It's the county, Victoria's the county, and they've tried and tried and tried. But the water goes in and collapses the alley. And I've spent over $1,800 repairing that because it comes into my yard. And it drops more than 12 feet. And I have pictures where there's more than 40 feet of drop. And if anyone were to use heavy trucks on that alley, I'm afraid it's going to drop in. And that's where the permit is very important for me and keeping it safe for others. Walking traffic on the alley and the grass, we all take care of the lawns out there. We treat it as our own. We don't live on it. Well, there might be a couple of neighbors that live on it, but they've got kids, right? That's fine. They need the space. But the safety piece, because I did lose a dog through one of these collapses. And this now had been about 15 years ago now. And it's scary because when it rains, where is it going to go? And it is known to have a culvert. And I believe you are aware of the culvert of these. And there's sand. And so there's not a lot of structure. And any place where is the CenturyLink and all the boxes, which I have in my yard on that end of the street, they have tunnels. So they open up the cements and they go down into the tunnels. So there's not a structure that's sound to have a lot of traffic on it. And I just want to be sure that we think safety at the end of the day. The other piece I really like is that I have a lot of floodlights, so I know who's in the alley in the backyard checking out my back doors and trying to break in. I got cameras, I call it in, and fine. And we all watch out for each other. So I've got things to watch out for myself, but I'm just not sure everyone else watches out for themselves when it goes through. I'm walking on grass and don't know if there's a culvert, and it's been raining, and don't know if there's a hidden safety issue. And that's all I want to mention.
Great, thank you. Appreciate your comments this evening. And once again, don't be shy about coming up and using that second chair when somebody is speaking. Hello and welcome.
Well, I was wondering, I wanted to make sure she didn't say what I needed to.
Good
We
point.
talked about the trees, you
What is
don't.
your name?
Oh, I'm sorry, Lisa Delgado, County Road B2,
Thank you.
846. We were talking about the easement and making sure that nobody planted their favorite tree. Well, right behind our house, there is a very, very large cottonwood that has been there for, I'd have no idea. But every year we have a lot of firewood because the branches comes down. And if this is approved, we end up with maintenance of that tree. As it is now, we call when the big branches are getting ready to crack or as they crack, and the city comes and takes care of it. And my question is, if this is approved, those trees that are problematic, that are safety issues, will those be taken care of by the city before it's approved?
Great, thank you for your question.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate that. Hello and welcome.
Good evening, Rich Schluter, 794 Lovell Avenue. So I have property that has two sides affected, the north side, northwest, or the north-south and the east-west. I've got a number of questions and maybe just a couple of comments. A couple of years ago, when we had a windstorm, there was a lot of damage in our alley. And when I called the city to find out whose responsibility it was to take care of things, there was kind of a, not a real clear answer, but I believe the city took responsibility for things that hung over the alley space. Anyway, it got cleaned up without me doing anything, and I'm not sure what my neighbor to the direct south did, but or had to do or was responsible for in terms of cost. But if we took that on now, I believe that then puts that responsibility in our, so, without the ability to encroach, and I guess I would like a definition of what an encroachment is. Is that a small garden? Is it as much as a fence or planting a tree? But if we're if we don't have any rights to that space, and maybe we do, I'm just not understanding correctly, but why would we take on the added responsibility, liability, if you will? In terms of property taxes, I have to believe that adding an additional 800 square feet to your property increases your property value, and I thought property taxes were based on property value, so I'm not sure I'm understanding that. And then 2 years ago, the same conversation I had about who's responsible for the alley, we got into the conversation. It was a city employee. I don't have my notes here, but I have them. And the conversation was, yeah, we'd like to kind of get rid of this responsibility and perhaps just turn over the property to the north-south owners and take care of it that way. We really don't need access to the alley anymore with trucks, as long as we have foot access from the street. That's what I was told. Maybe that's different now. And I guess the other question, or one of the questions I have is, does this access, when you're talking about this access, are you talking about access by virtue of a large truck, like the Excel trucks that come through and cut the trees and that kind of thing? Let's see. Another question I have is, are property markers going to be moved? I mean, if there was a path between my house and the house to the west, and I've been there 25 years, and there are big, big trees right down that, and fences when I got there, and the whole. If I just want to avoid any problems with my neighbor if that got moved. I believe it. I don't know where the property marker is, quite frankly. When I purchased the home, or when we purchased the home, it was presented as from here, this fence, to this, area. And would the property pins in the back be moved 10 feet out, is a question I have, or would they stay the same?
And you're at about 3 minutes and 30 seconds at this point, so.
I'll time out, because I'm sure there are others maybe have the same types of questions I have. So,
all right.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you for your questions. And we'll make sure to get answers. Hello and welcome.
Hi, I'm Bruce Patrick. I live on Grandview Avenue, and I had the same question about property taxes. I understand what you said about the city is not going to get any more money, but my question is will my property taxes go up? And I don't really see, there's no benefit to me if I can encroach into that area and it's going to cost me more in property taxes. I don't know why the city is doing it. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tom Arnold on Cope. On Cope, our only one of our concern is we only have one way out of our street, and that's to the east. When the street used to be paved or whatever, we could always park in our alley. And we park right against the fence or so. So if someone wanted to get by us, they could. So I kind of see an issue there. Also, I have a few very tall trees in the back of my yard that are right against the fence. So my issue is if someday they have to be cut down or whatever, people before us could always use the alley. The people who cut down the tree could always go there. Now you're saying we can't do that anymore, correct?
We'll get you
Oh,
an answer
sorry.
on that.
That's
Nope, that's all right.
Yeah, that's the concern. You know, if you went down some of these alleys, like on ours in Lovell and Cope, Grandview and whatever, people in general do a really nice job of keeping them up. I don't know why, they just can't stay the way they are. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Other comments on this proposal? Feel free. Come on up.
Hi, my name is Gary Flaherty. I live at 755 Lovell Avenue. I've lived in Roseville for 43 years, and as far as keeping the alleys, I think it's a great idea. Like he had mentioned, everybody keeps them up. You've got Comcast, you've got the power company. They do use it for access in a lot, and I've never had a problem in 43 years of anybody, breaking in or stealing anything. Some people use it just for walking, or they might bring their kids back there to kind of a little extra area to just do something, just to be different than that. But no, I think it's a great idea just to keep them the way that they are. And again, I've been there for 43 years, and I've never had any incident whatsoever. And I think it's great to have them in that. I had an air conditioning condenser I had to bring in. They couldn't get it through the front. They brought it in the alley. Worked out great. There's people down at the other end that have swimming pools, and I know their pool service companies sometimes come in if they have to bring in big heaters or something. It's just nice to have if you need to do something, even with landscaping and that. And everybody does, pretty much, it's like a grass alley. Everybody cuts their area, and sometimes if somebody doesn't, like if I got somebody on vacation, I'll cut it. It's a nice area for them to drive through if service needs to use it and that. So I would like to see it just stay the way that it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Greg Wisher. I live on the corner of Grandview and Victoria. I echo everybody else's concerns. I'm concerned about the county property taxes as well. I understand the city wouldn't gather any more revenue from that, but I can't imagine the county would not. And then when it comes into having that extra 10 feet of property that really we couldn't use and encroach on with a new fence, we already have a utility company encroaching on our property with a big guy wire that takes up, a good 10 by 10 foot section of our property that we can't use already. So I'm for keeping it how it is. I think, like everybody said, the neighbors keep it up very well, and the access still needs to remain. So it makes sense to keep it the way it is. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anyone else from the public who wishes to speak to the proposed vacation of rights-of-way for alleys in this area O?
Good evening, my name is Tom Malloy. I live on the corner of Cope and, Lovell and Grotto. And I'm concerned a lot with the property taxes, because the county, there's no way I can see the county passing that up. Right now, whether they charge you guys for it or not, who's to say? But I can almost guarantee they probably will charge us, and that's a big concern. I don't like, when people do drive in there, it does rut up. I'm on the corner, so they kind of, as they're going up the curb, down the curb, it does chew up the grass. So I would, if whatever happened, I prefer it to stay the way it is. I think, and if I'm correct, those of you that say you want it to stay it is, oppose it? Is that a yes? No, because no one's really saying they oppose it except for the two people that wrote in. So.
I think we were interpreting keep it the way it is. as
Okay, well,
opposed
just
to
making
vacation.
sure,
Yeah. Thank
The
you.
other thing, but I would like signs on either end of the alley that this is not for, maybe only authorized vehicles only. Years ago, I spoke to the previous gentleman that was the Public Works Director, Mr. Culver, and they had talked about doing that because there was a neighbor that constantly was driving up and down, the alley. So that's the concern, there. But the increase in property taxes where we cannot use the property at all in any way, shape, or form. There's no benefit to us. And I get, the city, wants to wash their hands of the trees and things like that. So that's, my concern. So, thanks.
Thank you. Hello, welcome.
I'm Lois Witzel, and I live on B2, and property that is behind me had a large tree, and only discovered that the tree was all hollow on the inside, and it had a huge branch that came over our garage. And I was having a tree taken down in the yard, and it turned out that when I called the city of Roseville, because it was in the alley, it was their responsibility, and they took it down. But they also then, because they had all their equipment in there, they then took down the ash tree at my expense. So I can't see why you want to change anything, because, it used to be that we would cut half and half, and now we're cutting, you cut it this time, I'll cut it the next time. And so we maintain it, but we have the power lines, we have Comcast, we have all the trucks, utility trucks going through there. And they did create a mess when I had the tree taken down in the alley, but they did come back and they fixed everything and sodded it, and now you would never know that there was anything back there. My fence has been replaced, and that was the reason, because the fence was getting all distorted, and so I'm opposed to any changes. Not because I'm old, but because I can't see where my taxes are gonna stay the same. I mean, they're gonna increase anyway, but, not because I'm acquired the property.
Hi, my name is Annette Otto, and I live on Grandview Avenue. And my question is, because I know that the utility pole is kind of between my house and the neighbor's house in that alleyway, are we the only area in Roseville that has utility poles that are within somebody's property? Is nobody else? Because I'm thinking my parents used to live on County Road B2, and I know there's an electric pole that's in between their house and the house behind them, and there was never an alley there. So the utility companies somehow have to get back to that without having a access like you're asking us to provide. So that was my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public? Hello, welcome.
James Haugen on B2. The property lines were a question of if they're going to be resurveyed. And then commenting on the utility trucks that came in between our alley a couple of years ago when it was really soggy, and they did a lot of damage to the soil. I'm still taking care of it and trying to bring it back to the condition that it was previously. So I'm opposed to the change in the alley. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, is there anyone else from the public who wishes to speak to this item?
Buenas noches. Good evening. And I want to thank everybody else for bringing up what I feel that possibly affected all of us, including me. But one thing that I live on 2392.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
2392 Victoria Street.
And your name?
My name is Judy Navarro.
Thank you, Judy.
And I'm thinking about, I have a pine tree that's connected right to our fence of our property. We had put new gutters on our roof about 4 years ago, I'd have to say. And we put them on to prevent the leaves from coming in, right? Well, we don't have that problem with the leaves. I hired some people to come and clean out my gutters thinking it was leaves, but what it is the needles coming off our pine tree, plugging it up at the very ends, and so what's happening, the ends of our gutter in the woods is rotted out. So now we got to replace that whole thing. So I was just hoping that someone could come down and just cut the part off with those needles so we don't get no more needles. And that would be awesome, but But we do need that. We're in age. My husband's up in the 80s, I'm in the late 70s, and we just can't climb those trees like that. So I would appreciate if somebody just come and look at it and see if there's something they can help us out with. That's it. We live in the alley. We keep that alley mowed down so that we don't have weeds coming like this, because down the alley, we do see some like that. So that's what we're doing as well. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tom Hessler, 838 County Road B2 West. I would just, for the record, like to state that we'd like to keep it the same as what it is right now. We maintain it. We use it sometimes for our dog to walk in. It's a good spot. People seem to maintain it very thoroughly. We'd just like to keep it the same. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this item this evening? All right.
10 seconds.
Actually, no, we one shot at the mic. Sorry about that. And I know I hate that too, because sometimes I think of something halfway through, but that's unfortunately that's the rule we have. With that, if there's no one else who wishes to speak, double checking. All right, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing then. And thank you everyone for your comments. And we've got a number of questions to answer, and probably I've put myself on the spot for the first response with my earlier comment about my inadequate description of the property tax system. So I will, with the indulgence of everyone, I will elaborate on that a little bit. What I described as the process for the city of Roseville is actually the process for every taxing authority in the county. So the Ramsey County, the school district, the mosquito districts, all those things, they set a budget, and that's how much money they're going to spend. Then they determine how much of that money comes from other sources, grants from other entities, or fees paid by people using things or whatever, and kind of what's left, generally speaking, is what the property tax would pay for. And so that amount, the gross amount that each entity needs in property taxes, is what's certified to Ramsey County for collection. And then what Ramsey County does is they take every property in the county and they figure out its proportion of the overall burden based on square footage and what type of property it is and all those sorts of things, and allocates a percentage of that total amount to that property. There's no question that the result of that process is a percentage that the value of your property is multiplied by to calculate your tax for each of those jurisdictions. And so certainly if your property value increases, depending on what happens to that percentage, your tax can go up or down in a given year, because what the taxing authority is doing is it's applying the tax bill across all the properties. And sometimes your proportion may go up or down if your value of your property changed differently than other properties in the city. So just as an example, there are years when residential values don't change very much, but commercial values go up higher. That means that that total number that we certify to the county gets distributed more amongst commercial properties than residential properties. But generally speaking, unless we certify a lower amount each year, that still may mean that individual residential properties may still pay a little more than they did the previous year. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there. It's not just a complete, if you add X square feet to your property, your bill automatically goes up by this. In theory, if everybody in this neighborhood has a little more property, the neighborhood's percentage of the total bill in the city is probably a little bit higher. So your percentage might be a little higher, and once again, we're talking about sort of on the margins of the size of your property versus what's being added. But it's too hard to say that it's a decision that's being driven by the desire to collect more taxes, because all we do is determine how much we need to collect as a total amount. We're not trying to sock it to anybody per se. But the other thing is, as we were talking about earlier, the whole point of vacation of rights of way is if the city doesn't have a purpose to own that property, the public entity, the city, should not be owning it, and that private property owners have rights to their property, and they should be able to have the right to use it and own it. That's sort of the general theory. Now, there are several questions about responsibility for things. And so one of those being is, I imagine, if a right-of-way is vacated by the city and somebody privately wants to access their property for a project through that easement that's maintained for utility access, it may happen without even the city's knowledge about it. And I don't know, are we going to have I'm trying to think if we need to have a permitting process or something like that for those incidental uses of these easements. And I was thinking about easements in front of or between properties related to utilities and how that works. If you can maybe talk about that, Mr. Fryhammer.
So since it's an easement for the city and for the utilities, unless you're doing work for those, they would not be allowed. It'd be trespassing.
Okay. So in other words, you'd be
have to-
trespassing on somebody else's private property at that point.
Correct.
Okay. So that's good to know. Then the notion of now if there's a tree that's in the alley that belongs to the city and has issues and the city is responsible for it, and now that property has been vacated to the property owner, does that transfer responsibility for the maintenance, care, and removal of dangerous aspects of that tree?
So
Or would the
cl-
city try to take care of that, as was suggested, before that happens?
So I will say this has been a very sticky gray area historically in the past of who maintains trees in unimproved right-of-ways. We have made it very clear the last few years with other neighborhoods, unimproved right-of-ways, there's no public purpose to maintain the trees, so we do not maintain them. I know there has been work in the past in this neighborhood and others, but we've clarified with legal counsel that there's no public purpose to do it, so why should we be investing public dollars when there's no public purpose? That being said, if we need to remove a tree because our utility is damaged, we would do that. But we're not going to go proactively do it because the underlying property owner is the owner of that tree.
Okay.
We didn't plant the trees. They were likely either planted by the property owners and/or were there prior to the development. So more recent history in this neighborhood and others is the city has not been maintaining trees in unimproved right-of-ways. If this was an improved alley, an improved road, we would maintain them.
Great. And just while I'm thinking about it, a question that I had is, do we currently have curb cuts in our city street curbs to access those alleys right now, or are they just straight curbs?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Curb cuts are what's there? Okay, so it's like a driveway type arrangement, or is it the standard high curb across that? Seems to be a mix of opinions or points of view on that. It may be that it's not all consistent. Okay.
Anywhere there's a sidewalk, there's a cut.
If it's just an alley,
But there's, the main path that they put in.
yeah. Well, okay, so, but that's like along B2 you're talking about, or on
The alley comes across.
Victoria? Okay, got it, okay.
The alley between Grandview and Lovell, at least on the Grotto side, does have tarmac and curbings allow them to drive.
So there is a lowered curb, okay. So it's not consistent, it doesn't sound like, through the area. But I imagine the desire with road improvements would eventually to be, if we vacate those, to make them not curb cuts. I'm imagining.
If we
Over time.
vacated it long-term, we would.
Yeah,
slowly
not
get rid of it.
instantaneously,
Correct.
obviously, but over time, okay. All right. Let's see, other questions. Oh, in terms of what constitutes an encroachment, I think fences, structures like sheds, retaining walls and that sort of thing. I'm imagining somebody could conceivably plant plants, but like a garden or something, but those may be damaged by utility access at that point.
Correct. Basically, typically it's retaining walls, fences, sheds, things that are not as movable. Obviously, any gardens or vegetation is at risk, but it's kind of a low risk. Usually that stuff like that can be worked around. I know a question was asked about access for other utilities. For example, the plat to the east would actually look like, if we vacated, that's kind of how the map representation would look. There is actually an underlying easement over that shared lot line. There's a 12-foot drainage and utility easement. Now, I'm sure there's a lot more encroachments there because historically it wasn't platted, so it probably doesn't look like there's a 12-foot gap there, but there is, and that's how Access and stuff can maintain, and obviously Excel's maintaining those poles because it's a similar situation. So it's different just because this one was platted with an alley, that one was platted with an easement, but that's kind of what we're trying to mirror.
So you're talking about to the east of
To the
Grotto,
east
there
of
are
Grotto-
no
To the east of Grotto is,
platted alleys.
it's not platted alley, it's platted easements between the lot lines.
Right.
And that's how the utilities get their access.
And so I'm curious in that instance as to, you know, where people have built their fences and sheds and those sorts of things.
Correct, I'm sure there's numerous encroachments there, but the city doesn't have any public infrastructure there, so the easements are really more for Excel, so that's why they probably haven't trickled down to us. They haven't complained about access. So.
Okay, so there are a lot of areas across the whole city.
Correct, there's a lot of them in Roseville.
Where there are
but that's
power
it.
poles running between properties, and there are access easements for those, but in fact, people have use of their property, essentially perhaps encroaching on those easements, but up to the property line.
Correct. Typically, the only ones the city really, I would say, maintains or keeps an eye on are ones we're out there doing sanitary maintenance on, storm sewer. We find those encroachments because we're out there doing our maintenance. Excel and some of the other ones, they don't do maintenance as often. They don't have to jet the sanitary lines and keep the storm sewers clear, so they don't see them as often or need to access them as often either.
And we do have those types of pipes under these
We
alleyways.
have some storm sewer in probably 3 or 4 segments here, not consistently. Sometimes the storm sewer is just stubbed off of like Victoria goes in 300 feet. But we don't have like mainline pipes running down the length of all the alleys.
Is it worth clarifying that in what we might take action on in terms of if we only need access 300 feet from Victoria, we maintain an easement over that and don't maintain an easement over the entire length for our purposes?
Well, we need to maintain easements for all the other utilities though.
Okay.
So there is power poles over all their easements that we're aware of. So we could certainly potentially reduce the width of the easement. That could be an option. But we'd have to look at that as a separate action at this point.
And so just in thinking about the public or the utility easements where there are power poles run between properties and there are easements, but maybe they're not enforced or anything, I mean, would the city require an encroachment agreement with the city to put a shed in one of those easements, even though maybe that historically hasn't been done? Technically, is that something that we're supposed to be enforcing, even though we may not have our own utilities underneath it?
We'd have to look at that in detail, but since it is drainage and we do know we have some drainage, even if there's not a pipe there, we'd want to make sure we have that ability to maintain and access it and then potentially provide it. So we'd have to look really detailed if we'd want to give up that right.
Okay. And there's just probably a lot of areas where we haven't done that in the past. And by we, I mean the city going back to 1948. Okay. Back to the questions that were being asked. I want to make sure that we're getting through them here. Are we aware of the culvert issue on Victoria with the county and issues potentially related to that?
Yeah, we can certainly follow up,
stability
but I know I thought we did address something like that a few years ago, but we can certainly follow up with the resident if additional work needs to be done. Certainly that is one of the reasons we would still need to maintain the utility is if there's an issue with our storm pipe or drainage, that is a city responsibility.
Got it. As I seem to recall from a previous round of these vacations, movement of property markers is not something the city is a part of. That would be the individual property owners would have to have their property surveyed.
Correct.
Once the vacation happens and once it's recorded at the county, if they want to know their new property markers.
Correct. So typically when we vacate it, it'll get recorded at the county. The county will update the plat or the half-section maps and the online mapping to reflect the new property lines. And then what they do is they just add, for example, if you're like Lot 1, Block 1, sheet of addition, it'll be plus the adjacent vacated right-of-way of the alleys. Typically what they do, they just amend it. But property owners would have to either hire their own surveyor to get it permanently staked. But the theory is you have your current property stakes. It's a relatively simple measurement. but it'd be up to individual property owners to put stakes in if they want new stakes.
Got it. All right. So the notion of parking in the alleyway during construction on Cope Avenue, because there's no other way out, I don't know that that would be, I'm not sure that is necessarily officially permitted now because it's an unimproved alley anyway, but it did occur, but I imagine that that wouldn't be because it's private properties, that would be considered.
Correct. If we vacated it, that wouldn't be a consideration. I guess we have numerous cul-de-sacs that are as long or longer, so, and they don't have alleys, so I guess this doesn't create anything different than we have in other parts of the city if we vacated the alleys.
All right. We talked about the utility poles in other parts of the city. I believe that gets to most of the questions. Council, were there other questions that you noted that maybe haven't been addressed? Councilmember Strawn?
Thank you. It seems to be a bit of inconsistency on understanding of the trucks and the trucks access. Some people are like, I don't want trucks coming, but trucks destroyed my yard a couple years ago. Can you describe what would change from the way it is now to the way it would be in the future with access for trucks and the frequency and anything else that might entail?
The frequency of either, Lumen or Comcast or the city would probably remain the same. It's going to be maintenance as needed. Obviously, if the vacation goes through, all other access theoretically goes away to other property owners. Depending upon what the nature of the alley looks like, agencies could adjust how they access into the alley potentially. It is a long alley though. There's a lot of power poles in there, so it's not like it's a really short alley. So that needs to be in consideration. But certainly, if we know power companies are ones causing the issue, we work with them all the time. They have permits to do work. It's real easy to get them to go fix it. They have bonds with us. We can address that, stuff like that. So if we know about it, hey, Comcast came through, they ripped up my yard because of this, we can go after them. Versus a random person goes through the alley and destroys it, who's going to fix my ruts? That's not going to be the city. We can't, it's not improved, that's not something we maintain. We don't have any control of it, so that's why we would refer that back to the property owners.
And that's the case now.
Correct.
The city doesn't repair activity in those alleys if it's not something that was a city permitted activity.
Correct. And I mean, if we were in there to do storm sewer work repair, then that would be us. But if Comcast is back there or Excel, that would be on them to do it, and we would have the authority to go after them to make sure they do it. But
because they got a permit from the city to do that.
They have a permit, or they have they're in the alley by permit. Exactly.
Right. Okay. And in other areas of the city, sometimes that access for, say, Excel, for power poles, for instance, is perpendicular to the power line through individual properties. I saw that when they did a pole replacement project in my neighborhood, and that's what they were doing, is going perpendicular from the street into each property to do that access. So I'm sure that may be what happens in those other neighborhoods nearby.
Correct.
Right. But in this case, there would be that utility easement, and it theoretically wouldn't be encroached into because it's not now as a right-of-way. So they could do the access that way in this neighborhood. All right, council questions or discussion from on this item, or I don't know if the council's ready for a motion, which could be to, there is the resolution, it could be a motion to adopt the resolution, it could be a motion to table this issue, it could be a motion not to vacate. Those are some of the options. There may be others as well, so I don't want to limit us. But it's really up to where the council is at this point, and like I said, if we still have additional questions, it's a chance to ask those. Councilmember Atten.
Is this area different, say, from the properties just to the east of Grotto, in that it does have some storm sewer, other city access pieces there, versus the poles? We've talked about poles. My own yard line went down last year. Someone came from through the neighbor's yard, in fact, and climbed up a ladder and did their work, right? Is this different because there are storm sewer things that would often need to be repaired with heavier machinery?
It is different than the neighborhood directly to the east, but we have other areas of town where we have drainage and utility easements in the backyards, and we have either sanitary sewer or storm sewer. It's not extremely common, but it's not also, there's numerous examples throughout the city where we're going through there to maintain a storm sewer that's in a backyard between two property lines, or a sanitary that cuts through because that was the only way to make grade back in the day.
And is that a case where we're accessing along the property lines, or is that a case where we might be accessing also from the street to the back of the property, along the easement that's between the two properties perpendicular to the street?
Both. I mean, it depends. Like storm sewer, we typically have to maintain both ends, so we go there. But if it's like sanitary sewer, we usually try to go from the street if we can, but we also have an easement machine, which we can use that machine a little tighter, less disruptive. We can do that as well. And the power companies and stuff have that stuff as well, so they can, they adapt to what access they have because it's limited. Obviously, right now, the access is great because it is a 20-foot alley. Theoretically, it's a 20-foot easement. Like I said, that is a potential. The easement could potentially be reduced, but we would have to notify that as a separate, that couldn't take place tonight. We'd have to do that as a separate action.
Councilmember Strawn.
I just had another question about the unimproved alleys. Because they were set up to kind of possibly be alleys at some point, which we don't need them to, and we're not planning on moving forward that way. Do they have down lighting like a alley in the city would have?
There is no lighting that I'm aware of that the city owns or Excel owns. There's potential that property owners maybe have a yard light or something, but there's no city-owned lighting associated with this.
Okay, thank you.
Right, and so once again, the difference between right-of-way and an easement in this case is fairly small, except for who owns the underlying property. Because the easement is being maintained for access purposes, but we don't own the property, it would revert to the property owner. Then it becomes a situation where, right now, as unimproved right-of-way, the city really doesn't authorize just general public drive-through access either, because we have not improved that alley. Is that correct?
Correct.
So the only difference being is that there's one owner of the whole length of it, which is the city, and we don't allow access there, versus individual property owners who would then own if we vacate the right-of-way, and they wouldn't allow access, or they would have to provide permission for access for the general public as opposed to a permitted utility access. So that's kind of the probably the biggest technical difference between the two situations.
Yeah, I mean, it's really with right-of-way, you have access to maintain our utilities. The really thing that we're giving up here is the right to ever have an improved alley for public access for other purposes. It's not improved. Certainly, it could be improved, but that would be a cost to the residents. We have no history of doing it. There's only two alleys that we have, and both of those are considered private and privately maintained. The city doesn't maintain them. So like I said, there's not a lot of history of alleys in Roseville. So this is the only, I shouldn't say it's the only, but there's the only one I'm aware of currently that is similar to this.
Okay. Well, I was just thinking about the Tamarack area, Tamarack Park area, where we had that. I think that was actually a street easement, though, behind those properties. Not that there's a great deal of difference, and those property owners were using it for their own access and benefit, and we ended up vacating that right-of-way, or has that come back to the council?
We vacated a portion of the right-of-way.
A portion of it.
We will be building a pathway in the remaining right-of-way.
Right, so we ended up maintaining it as pathway right-of-way as opposed to road right-of-way. We're not intending to build any pathways in this area.
Correct.
So the only purpose that the city has for access here is city utilities, and then there's also the potential for public utilities, cable, internet, and power, basically, through there.
Correct. The only public purpose is the utilities.
Mm-hmm. And the difference here is that it's already an area that is not generally used by the adjoining property owners, as opposed to a lot of other areas in the city where, even though there is that utility easement at the property line, as a matter of fact, the practice has seemed to have been in a lot of parts of the city that people generally use the property right up to the property line.
Yeah, I mean, really, the definition of the right-of-way creates the question, can I go back there? And the fact it's unimproved says no, but it creates a very big gray area, which is one of the reasons staff kind of wants to address the question. Do we need, there's no public purpose for it.
Right.
We can maintain what we need with easements.
Right. Council, so it seems like the consistent action of the city would be to vacate the right-of-way. The question is, how do we deal with the easements, maybe? And I don't know if there's something different than just maintaining easements over the properties as they are currently defined, or if we want to go back and look at this as smaller, narrower easements, or otherwise define them, or where are we at as a council? Councilmember Strawn.
I'd be curious to know if we could, in vacating, if we could reduce the easement so that they could maybe go within 5 feet of their property line as far as a fence or something, so that there would be a 10-foot section in between rather than 20. And not saying if they don't want to put a fence in, they could continue to use it, but just people like to have, they like to know where it starts, ends.
Yeah, so we'd have to look at that a little more in detail. Certainly, like where we have storm sewer that's buried, if it's deep, we need more room. But if it's where power poles are, conceivably, we could get away with a lesser. We have a lot of easements that are not 20 feet wide. We have a lot of them that are smaller.
And this is, once again, 20 feet in
Correct. The alley, the east-west alleys are 20 feet. The north-south walkways are I can't remember how they're defined, but the north-south ones are only 12 feet
Okay.
wide.
Thank you. Councilmember Schroeder.
I just want a little clarification probably from our attorney, is, you talked about if there's no reason for the city to own it, that we have an obligation to turn it back to the owner. And if we didn't turn it back, what's the liability or the problem from that aspect?
Ms. Tierney.
Mayor Rowe, Councilmember Schroeder, really good question. Let me just back up a little bit and give you a little foundation. The reason that it's inappropriate for the city to keep possession of right-of-way it's not using is because the city is paying to maintain it, to own it, to do the things that we're talking about here today. And cities are supposed to spend their money for the benefit of the public as a whole, as opposed to the benefit of individuals. And so what you could face if you failed to vacate a right-of-way that you should vacate is some kind of a taxpayer lawsuit for inappropriate expenditure of funds. It's kind of remote risk. No one's going to beat down the courthouse door to take action against the city. But there is the theoretical, if the city started to decide, well, let's put a lovely walking path back there, and let's, did all kinds of work to benefit single homeowners, then you've really crossed a line. It's not a bright line though. So, but the concept is that your focus is to be on benefit to the large public, capital P public, the broad public, and not toward an individual homeowner or an individual beneficiary of the expenditure of public funds. Usually these kinds of cases are the other way, where someone is coming to you and asking you to vacate, and you have to weigh how much do we need it versus what they need. This is kind of flipped on its head, so it's harder to think about. But it is the same concept about whether the expenditure of public funds is warranted given the public's need to use them.
Thank you.
And if I could there be a case made that if the city maintains ownership of right-of-way that the city has no intention of using and has publicly expressed no intention of using, that could be considered some sort of taking by a public entity of technically private property? And if you're not sure, that's okay too. But I'm just thinking conceptually in the sense of other things we know about out there.
Mayor Rowe, in this particular circumstance, I would think that would be unlikely. Is there a hypothetical circumstance where that could happen? Absolutely. But I don't think that in this circumstance, given the facts that I've been learning this
right.
evening, that that is a risk.
In other words, the theoretical case might be there, but the reality of the risk is not very likely.
The risk would be more if you, in these alleys, for example, if the city went through and prohibited all kinds of use and, you can't cross this line, you can't, delineated its boundary for no good reason. Now you might have a problem, but in this situation, I don't think that there's such a risk.
Okay. Councilmember Strawn.
Continuing with Attorney Tierney, in considering our previous conversations around Tamarack and our decision to vacate there, could those homeowners say that that's not fair, that we were inequitable in applying, if we chose not to apply here when we chose to apply in their neighborhood?
Mayor Rowe, Council Member Strawn, it is always a risk that the city is going to be accused of being unequal in their enforcement of similar concepts. In my experience, the similarities usually speak for themselves. And so while often litigants feel that these two situations are identical, in my legal opinion, it's very rare that situations are identical. And the two we're talking about here, I don't think are identical.
Councilmember Groff.
This is going back to details. Someone asked about their air conditioning unit access to the back of their lot. What would be the process if this goes forward for people to access the back of their lot, say for landscaping reasons or a delivery or whatever it would be? Is there a method with the city that they can?
There's not a method with the city. They would have to talk to their individual property owners whose property they'd be crossing.
Okay,
So it becomes a private
I see.
transaction, basically.
Because our easement only gives the city the rights or whoever's utility rights to maintain their utility.
And so in those situations, most likely what all the rest of us do is we access the back of our yard for those types of projects from the front of our yard.
Or if it's just one neighbor, maybe.
You may be able
does
to
that.
work something out, right? Yeah.
But these are long blocks, so it
Right.
would be.
Councilmember Strawn.
Another person asked about some type of signage at the end of the alley to indicate that there was no throughway, where maybe there had been previously, or visibly it looks like there may be something. Do you have any type of suggestion or ideas on that?
I mean, if it's vacated, certainly we could do that to reinforce it. If it's not vacated, we could theoretically do that. We've not traditionally done that. It might draw a light to it. It's still just signage. Like I said, technically, it's not allowed. You're driving on an unimproved surface, so it's. Do you draw light to it? So I'm a little torn if you would do it ahead of time.
Well, and certainly if the right-of-way is vacated, conceivably, the private property owners at each end of those streets could sign it themselves, as their
Correct, but I
property.
mean, with the curb cut there, I mean, certainly I could see us, at least in the short term, signing it to make it clear that it's no longer a public alley, something like that.
Okay, because the signage would probably be on the public right-of-way at that point. Okay. Council, thoughts on this as to whether we take action on the request this evening? Once again, if there are changes we'd like to look at, we could always table for further analysis, but I think we'd want to define what that is. So what is the desire of the council this evening?
Motion to approve vacation D.
Oh, that's an excellent idea.
Second.
All right. Moving us forward. Okay, Councilmember Strawn moves and Councilmember Groff seconds vacation of right-of-way D as outlined. And we have a resolution for that in the packet. Just double checking which resolution that is. That is attachment 1. That is the motion, correct? Yes. All right. So we have the motion before us, Resolution Attachment 1, which vacates the right-of-way as outlined in Area D as mapped on the information provided with Resolution Number 1. Discussion of the motion as the maker of the motion, Councilmember Strawn.
Nothing further.
Councilmember Groff is the seconder.
Just that this one I'm glad we had to come back because it provides access.
And it definitely clarifies questions that were raised during the discussion at that time. Other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and right-of-way, item D, Area D, is vacated per that resolution. As to Area O, Council. Who's prepared to make a motion of some sort? You have to do something. If nothing else, we could table action to another meeting, to a time indefinite, for a specific purpose, not for a specific purpose. But we do have to do something. This is,
For the purpose of discussion, I would move to approve it. And I'd like to hear.
right, so there's a motion by Councilmember Groff to approve the resolution vacating Area O. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second for that discussion.
All right, now, it's been moved and seconded, moved by Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Bratton. As was noted, for purposes of discussion and by way of discussion, as the maker of the motion, you get to go first. Councilmember Groff.
That's the penalty for me.
Yeah.
I certainly appreciate everything everyone has said, and I do think we need to take that into consideration in this discussion. I am concerned that the city does keep property that isn't ours. They can't hear me, sorry. I'll speak closer to the mic. Is that going to help?
It should.
Helps.
You have to speak towards the mic, definitely.
I appreciate what everyone said tonight, but I would like to, and thanks for pointing out that you couldn't hear me. I would like to have a discussion about it tonight so that we could probably decide what should be changed, if it should be changed, and what would make it work for everybody.
Right. As the seconder of the motion, Councilmember Bratton, you've drawn the next straw.
Sweet.
Yes.
I think the reason you're seeing people sit on their hands up here is we hear your points very strongly, and the legal pieces point a different direction. So here, what do we do, right? The people in the neighborhood are quite clear what you're looking for, which is for us to do nothing. But legally and normally in these situations, we would approve this and just move on, right? So I think that's why we're sitting here. I appreciate it, even for that discussion. And so I know I'm torn by that. I can see the benefit for the folks here, but then our attorney says we can't be doing things just to benefit a few homes. And I think that's absolutely the catch. I've been trying to think about, is there, as I love compromise, is there that compromise with that easement? And I don't see an easy compromise, shrinking the easement so people get, say, 5 more feet or whatever. That's kind of a half answer. And so I don't, either we have to jump in the pool or not. Because I don't see how that easily gets done. The point of accessing behind the property, I'm going to lean on what our Public Works Director says, is we all have, or there are thousands of properties in the city that don't have access to their backyard, whether it's for tree removal.
This type of access, maybe to be clear.
Yes, but if we were to vacate and that access disappeared for what some folks have used it for, that's something that a large percentage of homes and properties in the city don't have right now. So that's not for me, that can't be a reason to not vacate. That's as far as I have in my brain. That's why I was sitting my hands too.
All right. Well, we're moving things forward, hopefully. Other discussion. Councilmember Schroeder.
Yeah, I agree, because I appreciate everyone being here tonight and expressing their thoughts on it and helping educate me on the situation. And the hard part for me, and that's why I asked the question of the attorney, is legally, where is the city at, right? Because I feel I need to make sure and do what's legally right for the city. On the other hand, making sure that we are representing the residents of Roseville too. And so we want to make sure that, there's the balance, but the legal piece is the one that I want to make sure we don't step on the wrong side of that.
Great. Other discussion?
I'm in the same boat. All of us on the council up here are homeowners in Roseville. So we all have, electric poles in our backyards, and we all have to access our backyards in some way. And it can be frustrating, neighbors' fences and everything like that. But at the same time, too, it is hard not to defer to that public P with a capital P, that we are representing all of us. And I think it's hard. Sometimes this just feels like every Monday of jury duty for years and years on end. But we're called to try to make sure that we're looking at the common good of everyone. And so that's where it's a struggle. It'd be great to have it be the same, and yet it's not. It's something that everyone else in our city has the right and luxury to.
Right. Well, as you can see, this is not necessarily an easy, maybe it's a technically easy call, but a sitting up here and making these decisions, call, it's tougher, especially hearing from people in the neighborhood. And we definitely struggled with aspects of the decision on the Tamarack case as well. We have the added feature of the city wanting to put a pathway through there, so we ended up maintaining part of the right-of-way for our pathway in that case. But it still did eliminate the ability of those properties to access the back of their properties through the right-of-way because we vacated part of it. I think for consistency's sake, and because generally speaking in this country we respect private property rights, that's why I would lean to vacating in this case as well. It's very clear that the city has no intention to provide access on these pieces of property. We are not going to take action to provide appropriately improved surfaces for people to access, the public to access on them. It does not make sense for the city to maintain ownership of property in that case. So while it's, presents challenges to the property owners, and it may not be satisfactory, at the same time, I think it is something that I would ultimately have to support. Is there additional discussion from the council? Anybody moving towards one or another point of view on this motion? Or are we ready to have a vote? Did I hear the word vote? All right. We have the motion before us to adopt the resolution attachment, whichever it is, in the, well, Area O, it's resolution attachment, I'm sorry, 2, thank you. I couldn't find it right offhand. With that, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to adopt the resolution and vacate the rights of way as outlined in Area O signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes unanimously. That opposition, excuse me, ma'am, the opposition that has been registered in the public comment this night has been heard. We have a challenge in making the decision. We appreciate the input from people and the understanding of the process. And I was going to say that this is a situation where we know what vacation of easements is, and this is the first time you're experiencing it. So we definitely understand that. And bringing everybody up to speed on what it is a challenge just to get to that point of understanding. So thank you, everyone, once again for being here this evening and providing your input. And as always, while it may not be something that's appreciated by everybody, the outcome, at the same time, it's important that you had your voice in the process. With that, we are actually at our 8 o'clock break time, so why don't we take about a 5-minute break? All right, we're back from a short break. Appreciate everyone indulgence on that, and we are just a little bit behind on our agenda here, so we'll try to attempt to catch up here a little bit. The next item under business items this evening is item 7D, which is to consider, wait a second, 7C. Yes. To receive our 2024 community survey results, an analysis and a presentation from the survey company, Morris Leatherman. I believe our communications and public community relations manager, thank you, Corey Yunke, will introduce our consultant and for the presentation this evening. Mr. Yunke.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. With me today is Peter Leatherman from the Morris and Leatherman Company to, as you just said, present and answer any questions you may have on the 2024 community survey. Unless there are any immediate questions for staff, I'll let Mr. Leatherman begin.
I think we can let you begin.
Super. All right, it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening to go through the results of this year's survey. And I'll put up front, you have to think about that 2020 survey and the timing. We were about 2 months into the pandemic. And obviously, we're going to see some shifts in people's opinions. There was a lot more uncertainty at that point in time, especially as it relates to all forms of government, like the question that we're going to look at of empowerment. Do they think you could have a say? Well, at that point in time, you're doing Zoom meetings, and that was kind of limited. The other thing I'll say up front, just across the board, public opinion on just about everything is less enthusiastic than it has been since the pandemic. If somebody rated something excellent, they're more likely to say it's good. If they said it's good, it's only fair now. It's just a depression on the enthusiasm. And Minnesotans are always difficult to get enthusiastic about anything to start with. So that factor is in play, absolutely. But you have weathered the storm of the pandemic better than most. I'll say that up front as we go through these results. To remind everybody the methodology, we spoke with 400 randomly selected residents across the community. Interviews were conducted between April 18th and May 7th. Average interview time was 17 minutes. We did have 5% stay on the phone with us for over 45 minutes of their own volition. They're the historians in the community. And then the non-response rate was 5.5%. Once they realized that we weren't going to sell them anything or voter ID them, about 55% of the sample was completed by appointment. So it was when it was convenient for the person to take the survey, not when it was convenient for us to give the survey. Thus, it takes us much longer in the field because we did not want to bias the sample against those with an active lifestyle. And the 400 sample, projectable to plus or minus 5% in 95 out of 100 cases. Putting up some demographics, the profile of the community, and this is done for two reasons. First off, to validate the sample against updated census information, but then also we can look at differences between groups on questions. How do homeowners feel versus renters? Households with children versus households with seniors. First set of bars looks at the residential longevity. 26% have been in the community for 5 years or less, while 36% have been in the community for over 20 years. The typical resident lived in the city of Roseville for about 11 and a half years. 30% contain a senior in their household. 26% contain a child under the age of 18. 68% are homeowners. 32% are renters. The age distribution, 27% 18 to 34-year-olds, 31% 35 to 54, and 42% over the age of 55. Continuing with the demographics, 66% indicated they were white, 11% African American, 10% Asian Pacific Islander, 6% Hispanic Latino, 1% Native American, and 7% indicated that they were multiracial. Women outnumbered men by 4% in the sample. You can see the geographic distribution using Highway 36 and Snelling Avenue. And then the financially stressed. This is a question, especially for cities and school districts, as they're looking at a potential funding request that has played over the past few years. In 2023, only about 40% of referendums passed, and it had to do with the macroeconomics in the community. Years ago, this is my 30th year of doing this, we used to ask people about their income. We went away from that about 15 years ago and asked people to think about their income, not what it is, and to think about their expenses and how how that's matching up. The 47% financially stressed, the norm we're seeing in the first quarter of 2024 is 45%. A year ago, we were in the high 50s in the financially stressed. It was the most financially stressed situation we had since the recession of 2008, 2009. So it is a factor still. And to give you an understanding of where we were before the pandemic, the norm was about 26%. So while we have come down, we still have about 20 percentage points more people indicating that they are financially stressed. And that comes into play not so much with the sales tax will go more, the local sales tax option will go more in depth. But these people, they view everything through the lens of finances. And so it's really typical for what we see, like I mentioned, first quarter, you're right at about the norm. Now, like I mentioned, on the less enthusiasm, overall, 87% rate the quality of life in Roseville as excellent, 13% only fair or poor. Last time, it was 94%. The norm before the pandemic was 90 to 95. We're now down to 80 to 85. So you're above the norm. But most importantly, while you do have a 9-point drop, it's about a 25% decrease in the excellent rating. What we have found is a norm rate decrease of 50%. What was the norm of 22% and the excellent rating is now 10%. Everything has shifted, and that goes to the overall lack of enthusiasm we're seeing. So that 33%, while it is a drop, is very strong. It's where if we look at the 2020, you were twice the norm, you're now 3 times the norm as far as enthusiastic rating on the quality of life. Now, what do folks like most about the city? What leads the list? Close to friends and family, close to job, neighborhood housing, friendly people, convenient location. All the responses of the quintessential suburb in the Twin Cities metro area. Location, convenience is what they value most about the city. If we ask what they like most, we always follow up with the most serious. And this is also an indication of what's happened across the metro area since the last survey in 2020. And the concern is rising crime, and we see this everywhere. It's growing first ring, even second ring, third ring out. So it is typical that it's somewhere between the 15 to 25% range in the metro area. First ring, it's typically 20 to 30%. The other issue that is growing, I mentioned the financial stability of a household, is property taxes. And we're going to look at property taxes a little more in depth in a few charts. But what happened in 22, people got their property tax statement. They saw that their value of their home went up 25%, and they were thrilled. And I think only about 5% of those people realized what it was going to do when they opened up their property tax statement November 15th of 2022. And so it was like somebody flipped the light switch on property tax hostility. The high tax category as a top of the mind right now is somewhere between 15 and 20%. The other item I would point down to is the bottom, the nothings, the boosters. Coming out of the pandemic, there's a lot less boosters than ever before. Before the pandemic, the norm was about 12%. We're now down to 5%. People have been in their community a lot more than they ever have been, so they found more things that they're unhappy about, whether it's a pothole or a trail or what have you. So that 4X is really impressive. 1 in 5 being boosters. They see no problems in the city of Roseville. Overall assessment of the direction of the city, basically unchanged from 2018. An 85% endorsement. Norm on that is about 77% right now. Overall sense of community identity. Well, this has remained relatively strong in comparison because this is kind of eroded. You know, it was difficult there for 18 to 24 months to have a sense of community. And that 86% is very strong. Norm on that right now is about 75%. Who do they feel the closest connection to? The 2020 is just an asterisk right now. The city of Roseville, they kind of, everybody was isolated in their house during the time of the survey. So that's rebounded to 18%. The number one connection to, though, is their neighborhood. And this is the same all over the metro area. The connection is to their local neighborhood much more than the city. If they have kids, they'll put in the school district. But you also do have a large number of people saying it's the friends and family. It's that social community that they have, that they feel the closest connection to, and that might cross neighborhood boundaries. Do they feel welcomed in Roseville? Yes, 88%. Now, it is a drop. The 8%, it's difficult to look because it's 30 people basically saying that they do not feel welcome in that sense. So I did run a crosstab on this. Because the cell size is so small, when you run a t-test, there's no statistically significant differences on any of the demographics looking at it. It's something to look at, and this is a first a bullet point that we have, and when you do the next survey in 2-4 years, whenever, to see where it's gone. That 88%, the norm though right now is 80% of people feeling welcome in their community. What's the most important aspect on the quality of life when they think about it in their rating? Safety is actually down 15 points from 2018. And down 8 points from 2020. Sense of community, the same from 2020. Good schools has kind of stabilized at that 1 in 6. The correlation there is obviously the household has a child. Quiet and peaceful, the upkeep of the city. And then we do have a statistically significant increase on parks and recreation in the community. But there really is no one thing. It kind of is a holistic thing that people are looking for when they look at the quality of life in Roseville. Now, what is something for the city aspects to fix or improve? And this is absolutely a result of the macro metro area on crime, leading the list at 21%. Lower taxes, it is ironic that it's gone down in a time of higher property tax hostility. Better roads, and then everything else is in single digits. And once again, you go to the bottom, you got 16% saying there's nothing to fix. It really is this 1 in 4, 1 in 5 group, 1 in 6 group that's very dependable and very atypical for what we see over the past 4 years. What's currently missing? More jobs tripled from 5 to 17%. Sidewalks remain the same, more affordable housing, public transit dropped, more entertainment options, but you do have 36% that say there's nothing missing. Everything's perfect. So once again, it's not, you don't have anything at 35, 40, 45%. 1 in 3, 1 in 4 people coalescing around a response that would really be seen as something that's really necessary in the community. Nothing hits that mark on this question. What's most important for a high quality of life? Low crime rate, when we combine the most important and second most important, followed by a good school system, sense of community, well-maintained properties, lower property taxes, high property values, job opportunities, park and rec, shopping, community events and festivals. But the top 3, it's schools, it's safety, and it's that sense of community that people want to feel. Switching over then to park and recreation. This time, 94% rate the city parks and recreation facilities positively. Only 6% said only fair. The norm on this right now is about 85%. So very strong as an overall rating of the park system. What facilities do they use most often? Well, the pandemic, you could see before the pandemic, you had about 30% indicating they really don't use any. The pandemic, as everybody knows, has driven people into park and recreation, and it's held now. It's only 1 in 5 indicating that they don't use anything. Trails at 38%, neighborhood parks at 34%, and athletic fields at 10%. Upkeep and maintenance of parks. This is one of those things as people spend more time they find more things that kind of pushes the rating down. That 93% is outstanding, and the 31% excellent is 3 times the norm on the rating and the overall maintenance and upkeep of parks. It's just an outstanding rating. Participation in parks, 1 in 3 indicated that they participate in city recreation programs. 96% satisfaction rate with the experience with the Park and Rec program. Just outstanding. Use of trails. The typical resident uses trails in the community a couple times a month. You have 15% that are out there a lot. You have 14% that don't use them at all. But it kind of falls into a couple times a month, the typical resident on the use of trails. This one continues to be, this is what I call a pollster's nightmare. If you're looking for a mandate on a priority for a system, it's clear as mud. Connecting neighborhoods and parks, 38%. Exercise trails and parks, 33. Connecting neighborhoods and shopping, 21. So really, kind of, there's no mandate whatsoever on the priority for the system. The thing is you didn't have 10, 15, 20% volunteering, nothing. So, they really did pick between and considered. It just falls out that there's no mandate. Awareness of the newer park buildings, 65% indicated that they were aware of them. 36% indicated that their members of their household had used them in the past. The rating of the buildings, 99% favorable to 1% only fair. Nobody said poor. And would they use them again? Well, with a rating like that, yes, absolutely. 95% indicated that they would. Overall assessment then, do the recreation facilities in the city of Roseville meet their household needs? Absolutely. 95% say yes, only 1% say no. No, they do not. Let's switch over to just an overall view of city services. And we went through the list and we asked for an excellent, good, only fair, or poor rating. I've collapsed them down. Excellent, good in the blue. The red is only fair or poor. We're looking for a sea of blue instead of a red riptide. And you can see a lot of blue. Very strong from police, fire, all the way down. I will point out, the highest level of unfavorable is street repair and maintenance. It is in every city. That 21%, though, in comparison, the norm on that right now is 40%, only fair or poor. So while it is your lowest rated, it is a very, very good rating at only 21%, especially when we're talking in the springtime, where people really aren't happy about the quality of roads in Minnesota. Now, the question on asking folks about their feeling on property taxes, this is interesting in light of what I mentioned about what happened in 22 and 23. We do have a drop of uncertainty that we saw in 2020 from 19 to 7%. The high went from 46 and stayed at 46. That's actually one of the lower levels of property tax hostility that we have in the last 18 months. The norm on the high category in the last 18 months is 58%. The highest we have is a community just to your north. That was at 77%, very high and somewhat high last year. That's a very difficult property tax environment. So it is a concern. It's not the macro concern that we see in a lot of other communities. What about a tax increase to maintain city services? This is growing, and we've seen it grow now because, quite frankly, people understand inflation and cost of living. That it costs more to provide the same thing today has been, it kind of started to become ingrained in people during the recession. It is absolutely ingrained now that people realize it does cost more. So we do have 57% indicating that yes, they would support a property tax increase to maintain city services at their current level. Overall assessment then on the value of city services, it was 84% in 2020, it's 85% now. So even, and keep in mind, you have 14% say only fair or poor. You had 46% say their taxes were high. So even those that say their taxes are high, when you ask the value question, the city services they receive and the taxes they pay, it still nets out as a positive value for them in the minds of residents. Investment in infrastructure across the community. There's been a few changes, but really nothing statistically significant. Water and sewer pipes, 86% support. City buildings, 77%. Pedestrian pathways, 80%. Bikeways, 75%. And improving city roads, 94%. So this one is going to be limited by money. It's not going to be limited by support for potential projects of any of the 5 things that we tested in the community. We added some questions for the local sales tax option that you're going to have this November. Quite frankly, I was surprised at this point in time that 56% were aware. We've worked with many communities over in the 2023 cycle, and we would do a brush fire survey for them in September before the November election and just kind of test where it was at. At that point in time, they didn't have 56% of people aware that there was election, and they actually had started voting in a couple of them for early voting. So that 56% is a broad basis of awareness at this point in time. Now, you will not have 100% on election day, no. I mean, really the threshold here is going to be about 75 to 80% of the community that's actually aware that it's happening. So it's a wonderful foundation for awareness. And the importance on that is because a surprise voter on election day is a no voter. You want them aware, because if they walk in and they're just going to vote for the 2 candidates we have at the top of the ticket, and they get down and see this, they're going to vote no because they don't have the facts. So that's why awareness helps so much. Where are folks on the half-cent sales tax? For the construction of the Public Works and Parks and Recreation Maintenance Facility, 69% support to 24% opposed. On the new License and Passport Center, 65-29. So both look very strong right now. Now, there's always going to be attrition from these numbers. I always tell clients, because this is a perfect environment. There's been no campaign. There's been no discussion. So the typical is somewhere between an 8 to 10 point drop by the time you get people writing letters and social media and everything. So it's in a good basis. The other thing, not surprising to point out at that point in time, where you have 56% aware, you don't have a lot of intensity. We have 18% that feel strongly on the maintenance facility. It's better than 2-to-1 strong support to strong opposition. And on the passport license, it's 21%, 2-to-1 strong support versus strong opposition. So at the outset, there's a good basis of awareness and there's a good basis of support for both projects. We did test a couple or 3 arguments. We tell them, we know what their position is now, so now we'll give them some information and ask them, does it make you more likely, less likely, or no difference in your support? The first one is that 64% of the funding would come from residents that live outside the city of Roseville. 62% indicate that makes them more likely, only 3% less likely. What about the typical Roseville resident would pay about $55.48 a year, and the increase in sales tax, 56 to 10. And if the sales tax option failed and the city were to do these 2 projects on their own, it would cost the typical property tax owner about $430 a year. 60 to 6. So all of these arguments actually drive people to support, and actually more intense support, all 3 of them. And that's really what we see in all the polling on the local sales tax option that we've done in other communities. This one, absolutely impacted by the pandemic. You could see the outlier really in 2020, because at that point in time, I mean, I think I presented the 2020 results via Zoom from my basement because we weren't allowed to go outside at that point in time. So we're back up to normal. 72% indicate that they feel they can have a say, 22% say no, 7% are unsure. Now this one, it was pushed down and it has not come back from the pandemic. The norm on this right now is about 60% saying yes, they feel they can have a say. So that's a 20% increase in the number saying yes. Rating of the mayor and city council, it was 84%. It's now at 93%. 93 to 6, just an outstanding rating. I'll leave it at that. Similarly with the city and staff, 92 to 5. I mean, both of those are just off the charts for ratings on both the governance and the administration. What's the overall feeling on the general appearance and condition of Roseville? Homes and properties. Last time it was 95% favorable, this time 93%, but this is where we have that shift from the excellent to good. People are more aware, but they haven't tipped over to say it's only fair or poor. They've said, okay, it's good because there's this property here that I don't like, or that sort of thing. An overall assessment on the appearance of the community over the past 2 years, 44% say things have improved, 49% things have stayed about the same, and now we're down to 6% indicating that it's declined. So by an almost a 7-to-1 ratio, people do feel that the appearance and maintenance in the community has improved over the past couple of years, a strong endorsement. Enforcement of nuisance codes. This one, because going back, more people aware of code problems and violations, that 91% is just outstanding. And so, well, you were at 87%, the drop in the excellent. The norm on this right now is 75% on code, basically an overall rating of code enforcement. Public safety concerns. We read them a list, and they could tell us what they thought their top concern was. You have 5 that hit double digits. Drugs at 15, traffic speeding at 14, youth crime and vandalism, and auto break-ins and thefts at 13, and then residential crimes at 10. And this is pretty typical for what we see. The shift coming out of what's happened over the last 4 years in the metro area, most communities traffic speeding led by quite a distance, the concern. And now it's in the mix for the other concerns that we see. A lot of this has not so much necessarily to do with what's happened here. It's what's happened elsewhere. Crime crosses borders, just like people's concern on property taxes cross borders also. Amount of neighborhood patrolling. Not surprisingly, in light, this has grown as a number of people saying that there's not enough. It's up 10 points to 25%. Norman, the first ring suburbs, though, is just short of 35%, indicating there's not enough right now. So it's grown by 10 points. It's something to look at. It hasn't reached the threshold that we consider the norm. Overall assessment of characteristics in the community. This is set up like a traffic light. Red, stop, too many. Green, not enough, bring them in. And yellow, about the right amount. Affordable rental units at 49%, enough is the only thing that has less than a majority, indicating the community has the right amount. And if we just kind of go through the chart, for time's sake, I won't go individually, but look for big gaps between the red and the green side. I would look at potential areas for the city to explore. The biggest gap is really the assisted living piece. 8% saying too many, 33% not enough. And part of that is when you have a community that people value, that they feel strongly about, and especially it's aging, because when we look at this next slide on the commitment to stay here, they want to make sure that those options are there with life cycle housing. And this is pretty consistent, and it's actually quite an endorsement. If people really aren't committed, they really don't care about especially the assisted living, senior living type aspects, because they're looking to go elsewhere. Switching over to recycling, 81% of residents report participating in the program. They typically do it every 2 weeks, 72%. Would they favor every week collection for an additional fee? It perfectly divides the community. 50% favor, 49% oppose, strong favor, 5-1 in favor, a strong favor, but it's only 13%. I mean, the key is going to be what the fee is, and it comes down to the need, if they have enough recycling in order to justify the need for it. This one, city-managed trash collection has always amazed me as a pollster over 30 years in Minnesota. This is actually one of the strongest results that we have. You have a plurality support. I don't have any city that's ever had a majority support on city-managed trash collection. It's mom, apple pie, and the right to choose your garbage hauler in the state of Minnesota. So 48% favor, 37% oppose, 16% are unsure. What's unusual is you only have 17% that feel strongly on this issue. There's kind of a softening, I guess, in this community. The 2020 survey really doesn't provide any purpose because at that point in time, it was such high uncertainty. People didn't care. At that point, it was the pandemic. What was the reason for support? We followed up with both groups. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, 18% indicated that it would be less truck traffic, 13% lower cost. What's the reason for opposition? Choice. And then they like their current hauler at 13%. The drop-off site for food scraps and organics, 2/3 of folks indicated that they were aware of the site. We followed up with that group. 32% have never used it, so about 4 in 10 people said that they had used it at one point. The typical one, those that use it are using it once a month for drop-off. Now, we asked those that were not aware of the site and asked now that they were aware, how likely are they to use it? Not a lot of potential. 7% indicated they were very likely, 41% somewhat likely, but there's not a lot of potential growth on that one. What about likelihood of participating in curbside compost collection? This is pretty consistent to what we see in asking this over the last decade. The demand is not necessarily there on the service for what people willingness to use it. So we have 53% that say that they're at least somewhat likely to use it. Now, there's a big difference between indicating that you might be interested to actually changing and converting to behavior. So typically what we say is half of the people that say very likely and a quarter of the people that say somewhat likely will actually follow through and do that. Using that calculation, it comes in roughly at about 16%. We find when we ask this question in a city, it's about 15 to 20% that are actually interested of actually follow through and translate from interest into actual behavior on curbside compostable waste. And then finally, communications. 87% rated it favorably this time, 13% only fair, nobody said poor. Rating on communications from cities right now is at 75% favorable. Where are folks getting their information, and then how do they prefer to receive it? The city publications and newsletters, 42% say it's their primary, 43% say it's their preferred. The city website, basically a one-for-one for primary versus preference. Email, social media, you are different on one area. Part of it is in having the local newspaper kind of disappear in the community. And you're not unique on this. It's impacted communities across the metro area. What we typically see when the local newspaper goes away, that's a source of information for a very specific demographic, over 55-year-old men, okay? They're not going to go to the website, and what they have tended to do is use the grapevine as their source of information. And so there are school districts and cities where the number one source of information right now in the community is word of mouth, because the newspaper is no longer there. You have an incredibly strong, though, publication and newsletter that has been able to overcome that transference. They have someplace else to go. And if we look at just preference, if we look at the bronzer color bar here, print versus electronic, 43% say city publications and newsletters, 8% mailing, 1% still hope for a local weekly newspaper. It's 52%. A majority prefer something in their hands. If we look at do they want to push a button, 9% email, 21% city website, 13% social media, so about 44%. So an even distribution, very specific demographics, but overall this tells us that you're meeting folks, there's needs. There's really no deficiency in how they're getting information to how they would prefer to receive information. Going to the Roseville City News, 76% indicate that they have recall receiving it. 92% of them read it. So the reach of the newsletter is approximately 70% of the community is reading it. And then it goes to the effectiveness, to the point of overcoming the loss of the local newspaper. 93% say it's at least somewhat effective, with 50% very effective. And finally, social media. We asked folks first, do they use this method of electronic social media? And if they do they currently, or would they use that in the future to get information from the city? Not surprisingly, what's a rate here is users. The city website, absolutely, 73%. What follows next? Email, Facebook, then YouTube, Twitter, Nextdoor, and other social media sites. So the website, though, when you have 3/4 of the community indicating that they do use it, that's a very strong website. Typical use in a community, when you take those that have internet access and then ask them, do they access the website? It's typically somewhere between 60 and 65%. With that, in the interest of time, I would simply say this is a strong endorsement as the city comes out of the last 4 years and of the pandemic. We see a lot of the adjustments that I mentioned and the decrease in enthusiasm, but not to the point we've seen elsewhere. The city really has weathered the storm well. And it goes to that, to me, the ultimate question in the survey is, when you think about the city services you receive and the property taxes you pay, how do you rate that value? And even with the input of people's concern on property taxes different than it was 4 years ago or different than it was a decade ago, the rating is still 85%, saying the value provided from the city is a favorable value. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. Questions, Councilmember
I have
Stewart?
a curiosity about how you determine which household telephones are living in Roseville, since we don't have a phone book anymore.
It's a random sample generated out of a computer database that has every resident listed with landline and cell phone. Back in the day, we've been calling cell phones since 2007. That was a fault going. If you remember the 2008 election, the Star Tribune got in a lot of problems with their predictions because they didn't include cell phones in that survey methodology, and we'd been doing it for a year. God, I sound old. Back in the day, we would purchase the cell phone numbers from the cell phone companies. And I would just have to sign a waiver saying, because politicians like polls, there's a waiver that I'm not selling anything using those. Databases have been created now that it's incredible. And so it pulls up every resident in the community, and I just have the computer run a random sample. Tell it to pull out 400. And then as we go through, we're monitoring with quotas based on census data to make sure that it represents the community as a whole.
Sure, and then the 5% non-response, is that of the 400 that you reached out to? Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Great. Councilmember Schroeder?
Yes, thank you for presenting that. Carrie, you keep talking about the norm. Is it possible to get our data with that norm number in there as well? So as we go back to review it, we can see how we stack up to what this norm number?
Yeah. In the report I provided, at some of those key questions like quality of life, staff, administration, I put the norm in there, absolutely, for a basis so you have that. But if there are any questions, I can put those in also if there are any specific ones. Because that's what provides, it's interesting, you get the survey back and 60% feel this way, but how does it compare?
Right.
And you do have, you have the benefit, communities that have done surveys with us for years have the benefit of the history. But I would argue there's a reset in public opinion because of what happened in 2020. And we're kind of establishing new norms everywhere.
Exactly. That's where having both makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Right, other questions? I did just want to check in on the demographics of the survey response versus the census information for the city. Are we pretty correlate there because you're trying to achieve that?
Yep. Yeah, I think all of them, if you look at, and now the census has a margin of error too.
Right.
Most people don't know that. But within 3 points, I think in all those major, if we're looking at homeowners versus renters, households with seniors, households with children, and then ethnicity. Ethnicity is a little harder because they're allowed to say multi or biracial. Mm-hmm. And the census does have 2 or more classifications, but then it's interesting, but I'm perfectly comfortable within plus or minus 5% on all those key demographics.
I appreciate that, and I just wanted to clarify for sure that I understood how that worked.
Yep.
Once again, just to have that check. Yep. Other questions? Otherwise, thank you very much. We appreciate the work that you did for us and the information we have here, and we'll try to use it responsibly.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Peter.
All right. That brings us then now to item 7D, which is to discuss code change to our commission code related to the proposed Engagement and Inclusion Commission. And we have our Assistant City Manager, Rebecca Olson, back with us for this item at this time. Ms. Olson.
Thank you, Mayor, Council members. There's a lot of information in your packet, so I thought maybe a PowerPoint can help us get through some of that information in an effort of knowing what time it is this evening as well. So wanted to just start this. I'm not going to read through it. This is just a history of the meetings that you've held regarding all of the conversations related to this. Tonight, I really want to touch on 4 different points, and it is the draft ordinance that's in your packet. We'll talk about what's in that ordinance, when is it effective. We'll talk about the application for this upcoming commission, what questions to include. We'll talk through check-ins, what are they, when are they, and then talk through the timeline, dates and next steps. So first, walking through the draft ordinance in your packet, what's in it? We've got several different sections. We did work with our city attorney to draft it in a method that is consistent with the changes that were made to the rest of the code. So looking at it, the purpose, this is what was before you at the last meeting as well. So there have been no changes there. Under membership, we talked through thinking at about 7 members. Now, all of this information is here for you to decide if this is sufficient, if you want more members, fewer members, et cetera, et cetera. We also included some language really with the intention of making sure that the diversity, the perspectives unique to our community are reflected in the membership. That was something that we heard from council as well as other conversations and stakeholders. So the language here really highlights that the membership should reflect the diverse makeup of the community and lists some of those factors that are in there. The scope, duties, and functions section, these also have not changed since the last time you saw this, but the 4 areas are to review and provide feedback on things such as the departmental equity and inclusion plans, the strategic racial equity action plan, or whatever iteration that may be in the future, as well as allowing members that they may participate in equity and inclusion action team. That's something that we talked through about that vision with our community, with our organization, as well as allowing them, when appropriate and approved, to represent the city. So for example, if they are out and about at a community function, they may be there on behalf of the council or the staff to gather feedback or whatever that may look like, depending on what we're asking of them. And then the catch-all, which is perform other duties and functions as requested by staff and council. And last but not least, one of the things that we did include in here is the effective date. Typically, your ordinances are effective upon adoption, but we're requesting 30 days afterwards, simply so that we have time to hold a final meeting with the current Human Rights Inclusion and Engagement Commission to bring them up to speed and provide them the information, since they've been really foundational in helping get us to this point. So, a couple of the discussion points here that council has an opportunity to change or whatever. We did use the name of the commission as a placeholder, Equity and Inclusion Commission, looking at the scope and duties, the membership, and the effective date, if there are any changes you'd like to make. I can pause now, or I can continue going, and you can come back to these, however you'd like to proceed.
Why don't we kind of take them in turn if we want? So that way we can hopefully address things and move to the next one. So this
So-
one is the name, right?
This is, yes. Is council comfortable with the name of the Commission for Equity and Inclusion? Would you prefer something else?
Councilman Bratton.
I don't have a strong answer to something else, so I think it's fine. My question would be, some parts of this talk about Equity and Inclusion Advisory Commission and some Equity and Inclusion Commission. Is the word advisory necessary in the code?
I don't think we use it for other commissions.
So, Councilmember Mayor, one of the things that we had some internal conversations about regarding the term advisory is, since this commission is reviewing and providing feedback, they can be an advisory commission, but they may not necessarily have to provide advice or recommendations. They could just simply provide review and feedback.
More reasons to get rid of the word advisory?
Yeah, I agree.
Is there any objection to removing the word advisory from the name of the commission? All right.
9, 18, 26.
A lot of places.
All right.
That's it.
Other comments from the council in terms of the name?
I'm comfortable with the name, and I think that might be a place of empowerment for this commission if, once they start the work, they say, you know, this is actually would be a better name for us. I hate to create something too jargony that doesn't represent what they're doing, and make it more confusing for people in the community. I think it's really clear. I think part of what the problem was before is there were too many things and it was conflicting. I think it's really obvious. Equity and inclusion, there it is. So I think, at least to start with, I think for most effectiveness, it might just be best to just make it clear and direct.
All right. No objection to keeping the name as presented,
With advisory structure.
with the advisory stricken on lines 9, 18, and 26.
And wherever else.
All right.
And then regarding the scope and duties membership, okay, I'll pause. Scope and duties. One of the things that we had in there was the SREAP, and I know that there's other things that are wrapped up in the SREAP. There are things such as the racial equity impacts summaries, helping us define what the next version of that document may be. There's other things, and we hope to capture that under the policies, programs, procedures, initiatives, that statement in there. So it wouldn't preclude members from providing review and feedback on those types of things. We just didn't want to necessarily list everything in there.
I appreciate that clarification, because that was a question that I had earlier as I was going through this, because I know we had some discussion about specifically the racial equity impact statements in requests for council action. But if that is envisioned to be captured through the establishment and purpose with the reference to policies, procedures, projects, and programs, and doesn't need to necessarily be then listed under the duties and functions, as long as I think we're all clear on that, and perhaps the minutes of this meeting can be preserved as evidence of that, then I think I'm all right, because I agree that if we try to get into too many things under the scope duties or the duties and scope, we do start to get into the weeds a little bit. So I think if folks are comfortable with that, and I appreciate that explanation, then I am comfortable too. Any objection to that? All right.
And then for membership, we did put 7 members. That's an area that the council can consider as well as the language that's in there. That language that talks about reflecting the diversity of the community is not in any of your other commission language. We thought that this was an important piece given the scope and duties of this commission, but again, it is something that's open for conversation with the council.
Councilmember Groff.
So why isn't that in other commissions?
Yes.
Good question, Councilmember Groff. It is something that we could include. We would have to bring back an ordinance amendment, which easy enough we can do if that's the direction.
I think it makes sense to put it in our general commission code for all commissions.
I agree.
Because this is something we're looking for in all of our commissions.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. I think I'm just a little bit concerned on how we assess that, especially when we're picking people on a rolling basis. You take from whom comes forward. And so it may not be a nice Leatherman opportunity to randomly select just the perfect mix. So, as long as it's with the goal of, but, specifics we may not meet, depending on who comes forward as a interested party at the time.
Well, and perhaps that's an opportunity to promote that as something we're trying to achieve in terms of membership on commissions that might spur interest from individuals who might not otherwise apply if they know that that is something that we're seeking out from our community, is that broad, diverse
Right.
representation. So it might be something we can take advantage of that as part of our general commission code requirement, and then be more promotional of that in our commission, page for people that might be interested in getting on a commission or articles about opportunities to be on commissions and things like that.
In Mayor, council members, one thing I want to be clear is that diversity is a wide range of perspectives. It's not just the things that are listed in the commission ordinance, draft ordinance. However, it's lived experiences. Everybody has a unique perspective, and how can they bring that unique perspective to the commission and make sure that we have a variety of those perspectives? So it's not necessarily checking a box on certain things, but really looking at what different perspectives do applicants bring.
I think what we're saying is that we'll keep the language in this ordinance so we can get things moving, but I think we would want to subsequently do another ordinance to move it into the general 201 section.
As far as 7 members are concerned, I don't know, are we wanting to go there?
I was trying to think of what our numbers are on other commissions. I think they're generally 7.
Most are 7.
Yeah, I think in fact some that were 5, we upped to 7 at some point. So that seems right. I think we had it at 9, if I remember, on the previous iteration of the HRIAC, and I think that was similar to the Parks and Rec because we were thinking that there was all those things to do and the notion of having more people involved. But I think 7 does.
I think if we've fine-tuned what they're doing, it does help to be able to be accomplished by 7.
Yeah.
Right, 7 it is.
Great, thank you. So we'll move on. This is regarding the application. So there's a couple things that I want to highlight here. There is a recommended change to the application, and in the staff report, there's a couple other changes that are being recommended. They're optional. Council can choose to make these options. Again, you can also choose if you want to do this for all applications or if you want to have a separate application, whatever works. But one of the things that staff would like to recommend is a question regarding how do those applicants bring, what unique experience or perspective do they bring? There is a draft question in there. It's a starting point. If you have other questions that you feel are more appropriate, we can do that, but making sure that we have a way to capture that information to help council make an informed decision. The other changes here are really when we took a look at the application, we wanted to just make sure that we weren't asking duplicative questions, that we were able to make sure that the information we are requesting applicants provide us is important at that moment of the process. So one of the questions that we proposed changing was the residency question. As we know, we ask for an address, but then we redact that address in our public packets. And so wondering if it was more appropriate to ask if they were just simply a resident or not. The other piece to that is that when we collect data, sometimes through data requests, it could potentially be public, but I've talked with our city attorney, and she did assure me that if we collect that address, it would not be, it would be, did I say that correct? Okay, I'm gonna let her explain. I'm gonna let her explain what that means. So.
Ms. Tierney.
Well, I'll stay out of the weeds on this answer. The data, the residential address data is not public for applicants, but once they are appointed to the commission, then their address becomes public. But I don't know of a requirement that you track their address. So if you didn't want their address to become public, you shouldn't ask for it.
Thank you for clarifying that. Do you have the on the first part, the questions, did you have that to be able to put up for the public to see?
Are you?
Attachment 3?
Yeah,
Attachment 3, yes.
I think it was also in the staff report as well.
Is it? I do have the applications on the, if I could get the overhead there.
And is it the 5, 6, 7 down below?
Yeah. Yep, I think so. Excuse me. Okay.
Oop, that's volume.
We'll not do that then. All right, there we go. So the mayor is correct. It is the questions 5, 6, and 7. These are the starting points for that question related to equity. And there are questions on the current commission application that also address equity. Let me see if I can find that one. I don't know. Question 9 on this application is the current commission application. And the question reads, as a commissioner in your preferred commission, how could you contribute to the city's equity and inclusion initiatives? A suggested change as a starting point is please describe how your lived experiences contribute to your understanding of equity and inclusion, and how do these experiences reflect the diverse makeup of our community? I'll pause here if you'd like, and then we can continue moving on, or we can go through this and.
I think just as to the questions here, the one thing I did want to clarify is question 7. How do these experiences reflect the diverse makeup of the community? I wanted to understand what that question was trying to get at, because maybe I'm misunderstanding or confused by the wording of the question. So if you just talk about sort of how it relates to 6 and what is the additional information we're looking for getting there.
Sure. I think the intent behind the question was to say everybody has different experiences throughout their life. And some people have a lot of experiences that really impact how they approach equity and inclusion, the concepts, the overview of them, and wanting to know what are those lived experiences that are impacting your view of it. The second part of that is how do those experiences reflect the diverse makeup? Because there are a variety of, it's really getting at some of the, I'm coming at this as a white woman, or maybe somebody's coming at this as a trans or non-binary person. So maybe it's them saying, I'm approaching this because my experiences are different from other people because of X, Y, and Z. Again, it's a starting point. If there's something that council feels would be more appropriate to ask that might help you make a better decision, staff is open to that.
And I'm not sure I have a judgment on that yet. I was just trying to understand what the question was trying to get at in terms of information, because reflecting the diverse makeup of the community seems to me it's asking, how do your experiences, I'm not exactly sure what it's asking. How do your experiences sort of fit into the demographics of the
See, I
community or
agree.
something like that? So it's just not clear what we're trying to get.
It's very
So
confusing.
that's why I asked the question,
I
because,
would take that one out, that
Yep.
part of one, I would definitely take that part out. 'Cause
Councilmember
it is-
Strawn?
If
Oh,
you're,
sorry.
if you're having confusion, everybody else is, and I'm having confusion, everybody
Right.
else is having.
Well, and that's what my objective was, if there's a better way to say what we're trying to get at, then we could look at that too. But I guess I
Well,
want to
in
hear
a way,
from the
the one
council.
before it does talk about it some too,
Sure.
yeah. So just-
Councilmember Strawn, I think you had a.
I did. I also agree that 7 just, I don't think it speaks to what we want to know. But I do want to make sure that one of the other questions, I appreciate why do you want to serve, but describe your skills or experiences that you feel you bring to this commission. Not get left out, because I feel like that's really important. Like, why do you want to serve? But then what do you bring to us that might be unique or different is really important, because it's just really hard. People start to meld into one, and I want to know what you bring that's unique, and that could give us a really depth of understanding in that process.
Yeah, I agree
And,
with.
and just to clarify, I wanted to understand for sure whether that question was going out of this application, or if it was staying and this was additions to the application for this commission. So can we clarify that?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, first, just if we can have
Sure,
staff
Mayor,
clarify that.
Proposed right now, as it is proposed as a separate application. It does not include that question.
Okay, thank you. That was the clarification. All right, Councilmember Schroeder.
I'm not so sure we want 2 applications. I would think we'd almost want to change it so we have one, because what if you apply for more than one commission? You want to do this one, and then you have to fill out 2 applications? That just seems a little awkward. So could we figure out a way to have one application?
And I think that gets to Councilmember Strawn's point too,
Yeah.
is not to lose some of the things that are in the current application. Councilmember Etten.
I agree with everything that's been said by the last few people here. So I have a proposed question that would replace the proposed 6, and I agree, I don't, 7,
6
I
or
just
7?
can't put my
Okay.
finger on why I don't like 7. But kind of taking some of what was in the main application process and then kind of digging into some of what you talked about. Councilmember Strawn, we have this proposal. How do you see your lived experiences contributing to the work of this commission and the city's equity and inclusion initiatives? So how are those personal experiences, lived experiences, contributing to the work as well as an equity and inclusion piece?
Does that get rid of the other question about experience related to and combine it with this? Is that what you're suggesting?
For me, it combines that in the original one, number 8, how would you be beneficial in serving the commission based on your skills and experiences? And it gets into that lived experience and equity inclusion that I think are important for all of what we're trying to do.
I would agree with that, because I want to be sure people feel comfortable talking about their lived experience. To your point, if it is a person who's transgender or binary, they're not asked to talk about that very often, and that's something that would be scary for someone. I'm making a supposition here, but I think people I know would be uncomfortable coming to a city council and talking about that unless they were specifically asked to do so. And then they go like, okay, I have permission to talk about this. Now it fits in.
So I think the only thing I'm concerned about combining them the way that's been suggested is that it seems like we lose the specific activities, skills, and experiences related to the work of the commission in that, because now we're sort of adding in the equity portion of it and talking about lived experience. So I don't know that I think it sounds like, to me, it might lose some of what's in 8 that we want to have by combining them together. So I'm
Okay.
thinking there's a way to keep 2 separate ones. Councilmember
I
Stewart.
agree that there's a possibility of having both, and I actually think that there's a space in all of our commission applications for that equity and inclusion, if we want that to cross everything and we want to,
And we do have it in all of our,
if we want that to be part of it, I still think that's really a valid extra question, that they're two separate things. And I agree that there's a possibility of combining them, but I also think we could lose something of real value because I think they're two very different things. You could be a PhD and whatever. I mean, we've had some amazing candidates, but who can't articulate that equity inclusion piece. So we need both. We really can't, I think, one or the other. And it's a perfect world. We don't always get both. We get who's interested.
Councilmember Hatton.
Thanks for that feedback. I appreciate that, everyone. So what if, looking at the original one, keep 8, but 9 we could shorten, get rid of the first clause as a commissioner on your preferred commissions. Just say, how could your life experiences contribute to the city's equity and inclusion initiatives? Getting back into that
Yeah.
lived experience
How
piece
does, how
that
does your
is
lived experience
something we wanna
inform
talk about.
how you would contribute?
Sure.
Something like that.
Yep. Get rid of the first clause, because part of it's trying to, how do we declutter something,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, so have it the 2 questions.
Like that. So I think we can also have another shot at the language of the application.
Yeah.
The key action tonight, I think, is to try to get the ordinance and the process going. And then we can provide these feedback and suggestions, and it can come back to us on the application side of it, if that makes sense. But staff, do you kind of get a sense of kind of where we're going with that?
I do.
Okay.
So with that, I will, is council interested in making any other changes to come back and look at with the residency question or the address issue? If not, we can move forward and just continue with the application as is with the equity question.
So one of the things I was thinking about in terms of the address, I'm okay not having the address. I don't know that we need to ask people whether they're a resident. I mean, it's a requirement that they are a resident. So it feels a little weird to say it's a requirement. Are you a resident? So what I was wondering is if it'd be possible to get at, without a specific address, more general information, almost like the Morris Leatherman breakdown.
Exactly.
North of 36, south of 36, east of Snelling, west of Snelling type questions. So we can at least, I think we do try to get a little bit of a geographical balance on the commissions. But I don't know that we need to
That
collect
was
that address
exactly what I was going to
information.
say.
Okay, sorry about that.
Suggest that we put in the quadrants, and maybe knowing, are you a renter or a homeowner? I mean, I do think we really lack that diversity of socioeconomics, at least perceived socioeconomics when it comes to homeownership versus rental. So that doesn't always mean that's where socioeconomics are, but that is a perception. So, I mean, if we're going to kind of randomize the information a bit, I think if we really want to look at a variety of things.
So Mayor, council members, we do collect that as
I was gonna
demographic
say,
data.
yep.
But do you share that with us?
We do not in an identifiable way. So what we've been doing is collecting the data to identify trends. Information was shared a while ago when we first started talking about collecting this data on the data that we had. We're planning to come back later this fall with what information that we've had over probably the past year and a half or 2 years, but not in a manner that would be identifiable for any particular applicant on a commission. So it's more aggregate data rather than disaggregated data. And depending on how commissions are laid out, it's something that we would be very cautious about sharing as well.
So do we feel that we need to have that renter, homeowner type information on applicants specifically as part of our consideration?
No, it is hard sometimes, though. We have to make some wild assumptions when we have people like, okay, we're going to make this diversity hire, we're going to make this application, and we don't know. We're making a lot of assumptions about the person's background. So I appreciate the lived experience opportunity where they can share.
I was just going to say, maybe that can be an opportunity for people to get to some of those things in a more open-ended way.
Yeah.
And by their choice. Councilmember Hatton.
Thinking back to the question of whether we ask about address on the front end, I think our attorney said that doesn't need to be public at that point, only once someone becomes appointed or when someone's on a commission. Someone can Google search Jason Etten Roseville right now and find my address. And so I don't understand maybe why it would be a problem to have it here in this unredacted form as we consider things, But once someone's on a commission, they are, and we're asking those questions in other spots, they're opening themselves up to Government Data Practice Act, or their 16-year-old students in class. Mr. Etton, I see you live. Right? Both
They didn't
things.
request that from the city of Roseville.
They did not. They found it quickly. And so I'm not sure we're hiding, I don't understand why we're hiding it, because it's such easily accessible information at this point, and then we don't have to ask a separate question. It might be confusing. Some people live in the northeast part of the city or southeast.
Not
right?
everybody knows north and south.
But they know their address. So for me, I would go back to the original form and not try to manipulate things too much.
Does that, I mean, where is council at on the address question, I guess?
I want the address to stay in. I think the less we change tonight, the better.
And I agree, you know, I mean, that makes perfect sense with Councilmember Etten. I mean, yeah, you don't, pretty much everyone knows kind of where all of us live. If you want to know exactly, it doesn't take much.
Not that we're giving people ideas. Councilmember Schroeder.
Well, I was going to talk about the address, but obviously we've moved beyond that. And I would still put on, I don't know, I like knowing how long somebody has been in the city of Roseville. I'd leave that in there, because I think we need a diverse view on that too. I would like to see new people and long-term people on there, so I'd like to have that stay.
Can we, does it help to put it into broad categories like 0 to 5 years, 10 to 15, or whatever? I mean, I don't know. I mean, there was a concern as to whether we should have it in there, and so I'm trying to make sure we address that concern, or are we saying it isn't a concern?
Mayor, council members, the only reason that it was suggested as a change was to reduce any potential bias, positive, negative, whatever. Really just focus on the merits of the application. But in an effort to increase diversity, it could be something that we just maintain. And I think what I'm hearing is really focus on changing that equity question and leave everything else the same, and bring that back for final consideration.
And one application for all commissions.
One application.
And I would just say on the number of years in Roseville, I mean, I don't know that I've ever weighed that against an applicant, and sometimes we've actually appointed people that had less than a year of living in Roseville just because they were a tremendous applicant. And so people may perceive as they're choosing whether to apply, I get that, but maybe we just need to better explain that we don't penalize people for not being here very long or something. All right.
Okay.
How we doing?
Great, we are making progress. The next section that I wanted to just touch on are potential check-ins. We are really excited from the staff standpoint to get this commission up and running. We think that there's going to be some really good work that's done. However, we wanted to make sure that if council is concerned about the diversity of the membership, that we do a check-in before we go through the interview process. One suggestion, instead of bringing all of that demographic information to a public council meeting, is a quick administrative review. And as we mentioned, that there's a wide variety of what diversity means. If there is any concern coming back to council and having a broader conversation the meeting prior to your interviews, we have some intentional outreach that we're planning to do, different stakeholders throughout, but we can talk through what our recruitment plan has been, share that with council, and if there's anything else you'd like us to do, we could postpone interviews, or if we see a great group of applicants, we just continue, move forward, and we don't need that check-in. The second check-in is really to set up success for the group, is making sure that before we move into the annual vacancy period in January, February, where we declare vacancies, that we just do a double check with this commission. So term lengths, we may or may not have to alter based on what that is. We had talked about doing, the ordinance outlines a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year staggered term limit. Because this commission is being formed in the middle of a commission, bringing back some considerations on what that looks like as well prior to making appointments. So really just making sure that council is open to doing any sort of check-in along the way, just to make sure that we set this group up for success. If there's no need, we don't need it, but if there is any sort of concern either from council or from staff, maybe we have an opportunity set aside that if a further conversation needs to occur, we have that available.
I think from my point of view in terms of the term aspect of it, because we are sort of pointing in the midst of a normal term period, It seems to be that it follows along with our vacancy filling where somebody is eligible for subsequently, 2 full terms after filling a vacancy. And in this case, it would just be, the first term might be only 1 year, so they're essentially being appointed for part of a year, and then 1 year, and then they have the option for another 3-year, or 2 and another 3, or 3 and another 3, plus that partial period. And I don't know that we need to have a check-in in that regard specifically, if we just make that clear up front that's how we're approaching it, if that makes sense. But I do like the idea of the check-in. If we get a bunch of applications in and they, everybody looks like me, then that's not very diverse. And so that'd be good to have that check-in to say, do we want to maybe reopen the process and try to do some more recruiting and things like that? That makes sense. Other thoughts from council members? Councilmember Strong?
I think the first quarter discussion is still really important. We're trying to set this group up for success, and if the initial few meetings, it's not doing what we want it to do, here's the opportunity to consider that maybe it's an advisory commission or that it is an advisory committee instead of commission. But I think I don't see a harm in having a check-in to just kind of give us what kind of things have been accomplished and where are we at. It's really not much different in my mind than us having a joint meeting where we kind of learn, is this going to succeed? Or is this makeup of this group or just the nature of what this group talks about just going to have to go into this other thing, this other form?
So I really focused on the term aspect of the early quarter check-in. If that is addressed, I'm not sure that might not be kind of too soon to check
Okay.
in with the newly established commission, because we all talk about how it takes some time to get your feet under you and all that stuff. So if the first quarter timing was primarily related to the term question, then we could play around with that. But actually, if we're appointing earlier in this year, that's maybe not so soon now that I think about it, the first quarter check-in. But anyway, that was just where I was coming from on that.
So Mayor, Councilmember, the intent was to make sure that we are, again, building that strong foundation, making sure that the members are participating in a way that they anticipated they would participate, that this was something that, hey, I signed up for this, we're actually doing this, as opposed to some of the concerns that we had prior of, I thought we were going to do this, but we're not really doing that. So some of that is something that we had talked about doing, maybe either surveys or sitting down with each commission member, with a staff member and doing an informal interview of how are things going, and then bringing that information back to council if there's anything that arises that is of concern, but really making sure that we're building that relationship with those commission members and with the council. If council, we want to make sure council is aware of what the commission is doing. We're proposing some different communication channels that you'll hear about later as well, but just an intent to keep the lines of communication open.
I think as that's laid out, it tends to make sense.
I think
Councilmember.
that makes sense, but I mean, how many meetings? You're not going to do this after one meeting, because people need to have some time to learn who they are and.
So, Mayor, Councilmember Groff, we are hoping, depending on when we get to the timeline, to have our first meeting in September, and then doing maybe a check-in in January or early February with council. So we would have September, October, November, December, and maybe a January meeting.
Makes sense.
Yep. When we think about the timing that way, it does make sense. All right. So I think we're okay on that.
And then lastly, this is really hard to see on the screen. However, this is really just a tentative timeline. The one thing that we would like to do from a staff perspective is to have a special meeting with the HRIEC on what month are we in? June 12th. We would like to propose having that meeting. If the council is approving this ordinance, it would then sunset the HRIEC, and this new commission would take effect within 30 days. So we'd like an opportunity to have that conversation with the commission, as well as at the June 17th meeting, invite those commissioners for recognition, to thank them for their service, thank them for building this foundation. And then we would open the application period the next day. We can play with those dates a little bit, but this is just a tentative timeline. Have applications open until early August to make sure that we may adjust that August date just a little bit based on our city newsletter. I have to go back and remember. I think it hits in July, if I'm remembering my July-August dates, but making sure that we have that information available. And then we would do, as we talked about, a quick administrative review to make sure that those applications are diversified. And then, if necessary, that membership check-in with council on August 12th, because we do have the tentative interview scheduled for August 21st. And a reminder that this is midterm vacancies, so it's not just this commission, but we're trying to align it with that timeline. So as far as I am aware, I don't think we have any other midterm vacancies, but we're still trying to stick to that timeline. And then following that, we would do appointments at the following meeting in September, and hopefully have our first meeting September 18th. We would follow the same schedule as the current HRIEC, which would be the third Wednesday of the month. And then we would do a potential check-in in January. And again, those dates can move based on what's on agendas and everything, but just tentative timeline.
Makes sense.
Great. Councilmember
Will there
Strawn?
be a staff liaison?
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Strawn. So as of right now, the dedicated staff liaison will potentially be our equity and inclusion manager, Antonio. However, I plan to also be heavily involved. Our goal is to really make sure that this group is not just housed in the administration department, but that all of our department heads and assistant department heads have an opportunity to be building relationships, working with them, having them weigh in and provide feedback, because one of the things that they will be working on will be the departmental equity plans that come about as part of your strategic planning process. So.
That makes sense. I think just along those lines, it may make sense to think about some orientation, not just about being a new commissioner, but maybe about what the different departments of the city do and some of that stuff that used to be in Roseville U at one point back in the day. But I think that would be helpful, especially if they're going to be thinking about different departments' plans and things like that. Just understanding what the different departments do would be a step to help that. So, good. All right. I believe then, if there's no objection to the schedule that's been outlined, the specific requested action is a motion related to the proposed ordinance, which has had the 10-day notice, right? So we're able to adopt it this evening. I make a note for the public, there is nobody from the public here this evening to testify. There may have been somebody who had intended to do that, but I saw that they left earlier, so I apologize if we just got too long here. But from that point of view, is there a motion from the council? Councilmember Schroeder.
Second.
You get to decide.
All right.
I guess there's no point in me trying.
What was your motion going to be before it was seconded?
To approve the new ordinance that establishing the Equity Inclusion Commission.
Jason can have it. He worked hard on it.
And was that with the removal of the word of advisory in the three
Yes,
locations?
Yes,
All right.
exactly.
And I see the second to Jason, because he worked really hard on this.
All right, seconded by Councilmember Etten. Appreciate that. Discussion on the motion, Councilmember Schroeder, as the other person who worked pretty hard on this as well.
Yeah, I think we've had plenty of discussion on it, so I say let's just vote on it.
All right. Councilmember Etten as the seconder?
I agree.
Other discussion?
Well, I just want to say thank you to both of you for working, and
Absolutely.
also thank you to Rebecca and the staff for working. This has been a long process, but I think it's coming out really well in the end. So I know we're tired.
Thank you.
to go home, but I just wanted to make that statement.
No, and
I would like to reiterate that. I really applaud and appreciate that you guys really had the dedication to this and that you stayed with it. And I think I'm really excited about what this could be. And I'm excited that I've just known too many people who've not seen success on this particular commission. And gosh, if we want to worry about engagement, we really want to make sure we're setting people up for success. So I think we have an opportunity here that could outlast most of us, we hope. Fingers crossed.
Right.
Well, and just to add to that, I think we need to once again thank the folks on the existing HRIEC as well as
Absolutely.
past members who have engaged in this process, both officially through meetings and then also informally through communications with members of the committee and staff. I think that that all has informed the process and moved us to a better place, and so that's important to acknowledge as well. And also to acknowledge that amongst us, as well as amongst those folks and other people in the community, not everybody got maybe what they were ultimately looking for, but hopefully in the end, we've come to a product that's going to work the best for everybody, and that will address some of those other concerns in other ways. With that, we've got the motion before us to adopt the ordinance as amended, to remove the word advisory as noted. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and that ordinance is adopted. Thank you again. All right, that brings us then to approval of city council minutes and EDA minutes.
City
Right?
manager.
Oh, my gosh, I've got too many things crossed off here.
I guess that's something means.
All right, well, this report is going to be very brief, but it always is, too. So by state statute, we are required, subsequent to our performance evaluation of the employees that are subject to the council's authority, to report on that. And so I can report that we had a very positive review of Mr. Trudgeon's work as city manager, and a lot of good feedback, once again, from both council and staff reports that participated in the process. I think that led to a process of developing some good goals that are outlined and we'll be taking action on in the consent agenda shortly here. And so a positive review, we did approve for the step increase for Mr. Trudgeon, as well as who'll be receiving the COLA as well. And so that's all authorized and approved, and we appreciate the work he's doing for the city and look forward to continuing a good relationship and good work for the community. So thank you, Mr. Trudgeon, and thanks to the subcommittee once again for putting together the process. Our subcommittee that seems to be the subcommittee for everything.
Working them hard.
Yes, exactly.
Taking a breather now.
So that, I think, accomplishes that item under those requirements, and that then brings us to consideration of council and EDA minutes from the month of May. I don't recall if we had attendance or lack of attendance at any of those meetings, so hopefully maybe we can do it as a single motion.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Batten, seconded by Councilmember Groff to approve all three of those minutes. That's the minutes of the May 6th council meeting, the May 13th council meeting, as well as the May 13th Economic Development Authority meeting as presented. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Those minutes are approved. That then brings us to the consent agenda. No items removed earlier. Mr. Trudgeon, would you go through those items for our consideration this evening?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 10A approves payments in the amount of $316,779.48. Agenda item 10B approves an expenditure for a pump replacement at the St. Croix Stormwater Lift Station and the purchase of a vehicle for the police department. Item 10C approves various business licenses, including for cigarette tobacco products, gas pump and gas station licenses, massage therapy establishment licenses, and veterinary examination licenses. Item 10D approves the issuance of a premises permit for Minnesota Fast Pitch Academy Foundation to conduct lawful gambling activities at Smash Park at 1721 County Road C. Minnesota Fast Pitch already has a lawful gambling permit at Brent Distillery. The issuance of this premises permit will be number 10 of the 12 allowed, and we did check, and they do serve the trade area as required by the ordinance. Item 10E approves applying for a grant with the U.S. Department of Justice to assist the Roseville Police Department in seeking accreditation. The Minnesota Police Chiefs Association has been designated the accrediting agency for the state of Minnesota. The grant, if awarded, would pay for the cost of having a dedicated civilian accreditation manager to lead the department's efforts in accreditation. The grant would fully fund the salary and benefits for the position for the full 2 years. This would be a temporary position and would not extend beyond the 2-year grant-funded position. And then finally, item 10F approves the city manager's 24-25 goals. These goals are centered around implementing the city's strategic plan, focusing on the city budget and spending, and advancing the city's equity work.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Is there a motion on the consent items?
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Schroeder, seconded by Councilmember Strawn. Discussion on the motion, if any? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Those items are approved or accepted. That brings us to future agenda review. Mr. Trudgeon?
Real brief, June 17th is our next meeting. We'll have the appeal for the fence at 257 McCarran's. We'll have an all-department equity update, public hearing for a new restaurant, Centro Roseville, at the former Good Earth site. We'll have a joint meeting with the Finance Commission, look to award the contract with recycling carts, discuss the legislative impacts to the city budget. Spoiler alert, there wasn't much done by the legislature to really impact our budget directly. And talk about city council priorities, and as Ms. Olson mentioned, any midterm vacancies. We don't expect any from any other commissions. Reminder, June 24th would be the Rose Fest Parade. In July, we're still building those agendas, but we look to, at the 8th, have the issuance of the recycling request for proposals. Looking to have an update from RAP Strategies, our consultant, regarding the sales tax referendum. On July 15th, look to have the EDA 25 budget request. And the work session the same evening, we'll look at the capital improvement plan and potentially look to award the strategic planning consultant. We're in process of having conversations with potential folks that might be interested and waiting for some proposals after that, and then that time, and we hope will work out just fine. And that is the future agenda.
Right, questions on the future agenda? All right, council member communications, reports, announcements, future agenda items. Not hearing any. The only item remaining tonight is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
It's moved by Councilmember Groff, second by Councilmember Etten to adjourn. No discussion on a motion to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and we are adjourned at 9:37. Thank you, everyone.